3 minutes after 10. Good morning. And yeah, it's cold, isn't it? And it's cold in a way that is newsworthy. That's not exceptional. That's not extraordinary. The weather is always newsworthy. There are weather reports attached to almost every news bulletin you've ever encountered. But it's moved beyond mere information and become instead a social issue. I think sometimes that we don't notice the immensity of an event because it has crept up upon us incrementally. I'm not expecting any prizes for this observation, by the way. It is why the figure of speech boiling a frog exists, or by degrees. But just pause for a minute and step back from the fray for a moment and reflect upon the fact that we are currently living in a country in the 22nd year of the 21st century, after decades of wealth, decades of growth, with wobbles and recessions in between, but pretty much going back to the Industrial Revolution, we have been a, quote, world-leading economy, end quotes. And this isn't unique to the UK, by the way, it's just where we happen to live. And such is the structure of our systems that huge numbers of people in this country at this time are freezing cold and don't have the heating on. So this is why I want you just to step back for a minute, because think about the achievement of central heating being so widespread and available in this country. That it is within living memory that was not something you would take for granted. And of course, some people don't have central heating. Don't at me. But you may have a storage heater in every room, or the idea that you could keep your home warm on the coldest days would have been absolutely unthinkable to Victorians, for example, except the very, very wealthiest. And even before the Second World War and after the Second World War, while rationing continued, cold was a constant state for people during certain seasons, being cold. I'm not being naive. I appreciate that there were always people living in this country who have never had the security of warmth, the security of constant warmth, or the constant security of available warmth, however you prefer to describe it. We've spoken to people on this program. I remember reeling. I don't think I find any subjects harder than conversations about how tough people are finding it, to keep their heads above water, because there's so little you can do about it. It's one of the reasons why I do keep coming back to the fact that Rishi Sunak could afford to fix some fairly major problems in this country using his personal wealth. I don't think that's a healthy or even a fair observation. I think it's a bit like saying, oh, well, if you don't want refugees to drown in the English Channel, why don't you put them all up in your house? I think it's a bit like that. But there comes a point where personal wealth is so unjustifiably enormous that you can't help reflecting on the fact that, or at least it is if you've gone into politics, you can't help reflecting upon the fact that you could almost afford to give the nurses a noticeable pay rise from your own pocket money. But warmth, being beyond your reach, used to be confined to a tiny number of people. I don't know if you remember, I don't know how long you've been listening to this program, but I've had my moments of absolute disbelief when people have told me about turning on the radiator for an hour a day and the whole family sitting up against it, or people sitting on the sofa at home covered in blankets watching telly because they daren't turn the heating on. People watching the meter, knowing exactly what the relationship is between their monthly bill and boiling a kettle. I have reeled from some of the choices faced, particularly by parents, about eating or heating. I don't know if you remember, but relatively recently, and by that I mean in the era when we've had a fairly hefty audience rather than in the earliest days when I'm not sure anyone was listening. But you will probably remember the wife of a trainee teacher in it was a Norfolk seaside town. It may have been Cromer, a really lovely caller who talked to us about inside coats. This was last winter. This was before the energy cost crisis. She talked to us about inside coats, the coats that her and her children wore inside their home. so that they could put on an even thicker coat or another layer when they went outside and actually notice the benefit of a coat. Because if you're wearing them inside and you go outside, you're not really going to notice the benefit of the coat when you go from a hopefully slightly warmer atmosphere into a colder one. And I'm afraid it's about to get worse. This is news. This would always be news, but it's news that will reach many people listening to this program, possibly even all of us, in a way that it hasn't reached us before. Snow is forecast across parts of the UK as forecasters warn of a severe cold snap brought in by Arctic winds expected to last until next week. In some areas, you could be looking at temperatures plunging below minus 10 degrees centigrade. That's sub-zero nights setting in across the country. And last night was freezing, right? You were colder last night than you've been probably at any other point this year. I haven't checked the numbers, but you know when you wake up how hard it is to get out of bed. Even if you're lucky enough to have the heating kicking in half an hour before you get out of bed or an hour before you get out of bed, you can tell when it's colder than it was the night before or the week before or the month before. And it is freezing. It is freezing. And I think we're just going to talk about it together, like we would if we were not communicating via the medium of radio, but were instead sitting next to each other in a warm bank or chatting over a cup of coffee. Coffee, warm you up briefly. It is a moment to reflect, possibly to blame or to apportion responsibility, although that's not my most immediate priority this morning. I think today is a rare day on the radio, where we just need to talk about something that we are almost all experiencing, or in most cases enduring, just to remind everybody that nobody is alone. Nobody is alone in this experience. That the times when I've taken calls from people telling us about inside and outside coats or letting the kids sit by the radiator for an hour in the evening, those calls are no longer exceptional. People who would have traditionally seen themselves as successful or middle class, whatever phrase you prefer, solvent, are not turning on their heating at all in some cases. Some of that fear may be irrational, and we can have a look at that. But some of it will be rational. You've done the calculations. You've looked at what is likely to be dropping onto the doormat when all the other costs are going up as well, right across the board. And it's not a miserable conversation. It is just a real conversation, real life conversation. Obviously, I in the interest of full disclosure, I'm better insulated from some of this than most people or many people, but you're still conscious of it. You're still conscious of it. So I can't quite believe that I now think about the heating bills in my home as with a modicum of stress, with a degree of stress, with a bit of, oh crikey, marching around, closing doors, shutting down some rooms, and worrying about what's going to drop onto the doormat, even though we'll be good for it, but it will take a chunk out of other things, especially with Christmas coming up. And then I speak to colleagues, and this is an amazing building where we work, full of amazing people who are at the top of their game. These are the jobs that people who want to go into radio when they leave college dream of getting, and they are in some cases not even turning their heating on. Not even turning their heating on. I mean, this is anecdotal. Some people grew up poor and are terrified of ever being poor again, so they're just worried. We've created an atmosphere where people are terrified of turning on the radiators when perhaps they could actually afford to, but they're not going to. And then there is the problem of shared homes. You might want to turn the heating on, but your flatmate says they can't afford it. What do you do then? You get one of those nice blankets. They're not cheap, 70 or 80 quid. That already prices many people out of the market, but they cost pennies to run, and you can wrap yourself in one of those and do sit if you. What if you're working from home? You haven't got the choice. The office is colder than it's ever been before. Certainly in the communal areas, the stairwells, they're like polar stations now in this building. I mean, it is just incredible. And it is incredible. I use the word advisedly because you step back, as I told you to do 10 minutes ago, step back from this story and just have a think about how nuts this is. I Millions and millions and millions of people in this country are cold. Now, at the extremities, you've got warm banks. Beyond the extremities, you've got people who are too frail to get to warm banks, but are just as cold in their homes as the people who are availing themselves of the services in the community centres or the gathering places or the warm banks, whatever you prefer to call them. And that is no longer exceptional. People sitting in their homes wrapped in blankets. I don't know, and you may disagree, I don't know if I want to get political about it today. Clearly a bit more clarity and leadership, but not just over the current administration. Going back decades, certainly going back years, things should have been done differently. Reliance on fossil fuels, reliance on the kind of energy that it now costs the earth. All of these things are going to be part of a big picture. But I don't know how helpful it is today to start screaming about the fact that the current chairman of the Conservative Party wants to put the heating for his stables on expenses, while huge numbers of people in this country currently can't afford to heat their living room. But maybe you think it is pertinent. Maybe you think it is relevant. It is 14 minutes after 10. And it is a curious conversation that we're going to have today. But let's start with this. How are you coping with the cold? And from that, I want you to take anything you want to take. Whether it's a tale of genuine hardship and suffering, or whether you are somebody who can't quite believe that the measures you're taking are being taken by you. Okay? So my wife works from home quite a lot, and she won't turn the heating on, even if I encourage her to do so. So she will sit at her desk with a electric blanket, with a heated blanket over her shoulders. And I can't quite believe that is happening in our family at this time. But it is. We're environmentally conscious in the house, but we are not environmentally conscious enough to turn the heating off when it's cheap, when the fuel is cheap, when heating is cheap, when energy is heat. Energy is cheap, but I can't quite believe it's reached my level of the socioeconomic ladder. I hope that doesn't sound smug, or of course it doesn't sound smug, unless you desperately want it to sound smug, in which case everything does. But it is absolutely remarkable. What are we, the 6th largest economy in the world at the moment? 5th, 6th? Last time I checked. You people possessed of epic wealth in this country. Michelle Mone, how much money did she make from unusable PPE via a company she insisted she had absolutely nothing to do with? So some people are fine. The money's there, swishing and swilling and swashing around. But we are living in a country in the 21st century that Charles Dickens could have written about in many cases. Charles Dickens could have appeared at millions of windows in this country and written about the measures people were taking to keep warm. You remember that Bob Cratchit in Scrooge's office, that they counted the coal. You remember that? Beautiful opening scenes of A Christmas Carol, where the counting of the coal, the meagre flames in the grate where the clerk sat, in contrast, I think, to where Scrooge himself sat, although possibly his miserliness meant that he didn't heat himself up either. Charles Dickens could put his head to your window, put his face to your window, and write about what he sees when it comes to what we are currently doing to cope with the cold. And all I really want to do is talk about it with a side order, a small side order of politics. Because, you know, if you've got people like Jake Berry suggesting you stick an extra jumper on or cut down your consumption, or who was it? Was it him that said, you know, some supermarkets have a value range? I think people who can't afford to they're going to be amazed to discover Tesco value, aren't they? Or Waitrose Essentials. That's incredible that you can end up in public office, public life, and think that the poorest people in this country are going to be unaware of the cheapest food. That's actually incredible. Probably Charles Dickens could have some fun with that as well. It'd be a latter-day Mr. Bumble. But there we are. I'll give you the number now, and then you call me. How are you? What are you going to do? How are you coping? And particularly interested in people who can't quite believe that what they're doing. Can't quite believe that people like you are doing the things that you do. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. And there's an embarrassment, there's a stigma in this country about talking about this kind of stuff. I hope that we can swerve that. I hope that we can somehow avoid it or overcome it, and I can only do that with your help. So, you're thinking, well, I think he'd probably be quite interested in my story, but I don't really know if I want to ring in and share it. There'll be some people listening who need to know. Not just Conservative ministers, but people up and down the country who will need to know what the reality is of this cold. I'm wearing fingerless gloves in the house, James. FFS, I'll let you remind yourself what that stands for. Fingerless gloves in the house. 0345 6060 973. 21 minutes after 10, some astonishing news from Germany this morning. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but 3,000 police officers raided over 130 homes across the country, making 25 arrests linked to a far-right coup plot. Conspirators said to include an aristocrat called Prince Heinrich XIII, who is a former AfD MP. That's the party, of course, that Nigel Farage travelled to Germany to address, and himself a former Bundeswehr commander. So Farage really picks him, doesn't he? A cheerleader for Donald Trump, who incited a coup in America, and a speaker of choice for a party from which a man linked to a far-right coup in Germany this morning has sprung as well. We'll get a little bit more on that story later in the day, because we're talking about the cold. And I never believed I'd say that on the radio. I really didn't. Listen, if I was presenting, I don't want to insult anybody, but if I was presenting, Wheels of Steel, 60s soundtrack on a tiny little radio station in somewhere like Blackpool, then deliberately aimed at pensioners, then maybe we would come on air and say, oh, it's cold, isn't it? But if this isn't relevant to you, then either you're listening outside this country or you're very, very lucky. Eloise is in Nottingham. Eloise, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi there, James. It was your comment regarding finding yourself in that position when you're mentioning about your wife using the electric blanket. I've always grown up in a middle-class family. I was very fortunate to go to private school, live in big, beautiful houses. But now it's finding that juxtaposition between coming home from a warm office, coming into my house, and the ceilings are too high to even really consider putting the heating on at the cost that it would take to actually heat the rooms.
That is tiny violin territory, isn't it? Because I sympathise, but my house is so huge that the heating barely touches the sides, and unless I have it on all day, I know exactly what you mean. A lot of people will, and this is exactly the conversation I want to have, because it's reaching the parts that these kind of issues never normally reach.
Yeah, of course. And don't get me wrong, I realise I'm in a very privileged position to be in such a nice house.
Of course you do.
But it's just bizarre to be able to come home, walk through the front door and think, bloody hell, I better put a hat on or 2 dressing gowns in order to be warm enough to walk around the house. Incredible.
What are you doing? Are you confining yourselves to 1 or 2 rooms, or are you just sucking it up? Because it's going to get colder.
Yes, I'm contemplating what the rest of the week might look like. No, we're just sucking it up at the moment. Hot water bottles, extra layers, but ultimately when you can see your breath in the house, it can't be too healthy.
I know, it's incredible and normal, and we're in it for the duration. Of course, these days as well, the children don't all sit in the same room like we did when we were kids. I'm sounding so old this morning. Wait till we get on to the next conversation about 250,000 youngsters who aren't ever going to look for a job. But you used to sit roughly in the same room, right? We had a 3-bar electric fire. It never put the third bar on. Ever put the third bar. In fact, if we turned on the second bar and Dad came in, he'd be quite cross. But 1 bar, we're all there watching the same programmes. Me and my sister would watch children's TV. But these days, the kids are off. They've got a million screens of their own, doing their own thing. So, I don't know. There's a lot going on. Thank you, Eloise. Ed's in Taunton. Ed, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. You all right?
I'm all right. Bit cold, mate. Bit cold, but otherwise I'm fine. Got my scarf on in the studio, and I've got central heating. Go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on your point, really, about, I'm quite lucky, really, in the sense that myself and my partner are probably what you argue as being quite solvent in this day and age. But we have only just sort of in the last month or so put the heating on ourselves, I should say. We went for a long time, just with a blanket on the sofa.
Did you need to? And I don't mean that in a patronising way. I've just spoken to a couple of people off air this morning who aren't turning the heating on, but actually aren't 100% sure that they can't afford to. They've just got a kind of...
Well, I think I said to your researcher a minute ago, I mean, the thing that sort of... We pay a direct debit of £256 a month,
right,
to get into too financial. We were just concerned that wasn't going to kind of cover what we were going to end up actually, using.
Right.
And,
yes, that happens.
£256 a month is fairly substantial as it is. We were just worried that we were going to, push it, sort of right up over £300, £300+ a month. Our direct debit's going to get reassessed in January time, I think it is. That's going into sort of the even colder months of the year, and obviously we don't want to sort of go up even further then from January. So it was just that concern. It was actually my partner's grandmother who came round, and she was sat in a puffer jacket on the sofa, and she said,
"Gangster granny."
You can afford to put the heating on, guys. You need to do something about this, because you can't live the way you are. You can't go into the winter months sat on the sofa in jackets under blankets.
Bizarre, isn't it? I wonder. It's very hard to measure that, because most people, the bills haven't properly landed yet, so they're making decisions based on trepidation.
You're having to almost sort of like forward think, especially if your direct debits are getting reassessed. I say like what's going to be in our case, they are going to be reassessed in January, but you're also having to sort of like pre-plan to an extent. How much am I going to use? And if by using so much, am I going to end up pushing my direct debit up even higher than it is at the moment already?
No, there it is. And you would, I know it's a phrase that covers a multitude of situations, but you would consider yourself broadly to be comfortable financially normally.
Yes, yeah. I work I'm public servant myself. My partner's a dentist, and we definitely are. As I said, we are.
This is Britain in 2022. A dentist sitting on the sofa wrapped in a blanket watching telly. I just never thought I'd see it.
It's tragic, isn't it?
It is tragic, and we're not in any way denying or denigrating the experience of people who are less well off. Of course we're not, but it is a very good way of illustrating how widespread the problem is, because there is particularly in Tory circles, a temptation to misinterpret the words of Jesus, is that the poor will always be with us, which Jesus, of course, intends as a reminder to do your level best to help them, whereas some people take it, well, there's no point in doing this kind of thing. The poor will always... There have always been people living in poverty, tragically, heartbreakingly, and there have always been people rationing heat and living in the cold. But this is a question of scale, and you can only measure the scale by looking at the parts it's reaching that it's never reached before. And to that end, this is from Ashley, who can't bear to call in because he says, or she says, I would get too upset. The house I live in is riddled with mould. My son has been coughing for weeks, and to stay warm, I've been wearing 2 pairs of socks, 2 shirts, 1 long sleeve, 1 short sleeve, a hoodie, and then a coat. All I want to do is provide for my family, and it's left me feeling like a failure. Well, you're not a failure. And the main reason why I know you're not a failure is because you care so much. Caring is the opposite in many ways of the sort of failure you fear that you're enduring. But also, listen to this show, Ashley. Listen to all the people in similar situations, maybe not as bad, maybe some people in worse situations than you, but this is something that is being done to you. This is not a consequence of your conduct or your choices. This is something that is being done to us all by a combination of circumstances over which we have no control. Andy gets political, and good on him for doing so. Let's not miss the elephant in the room, James. People are going cold. To protect the dividends of shareholders and investors, this was always going to happen. And Alice, who's in Northwich, writes, yep, sitting here in my inside coat, having just heard Stephen Barclay being interviewed, failing to be asked the right questions by a different broadcaster. What goes on in these people's brains when they know that people are dying and will continue to die purely as a result of their lack of action? 10:30 is the time. Lottie Morley's here now with your headlines. It is 10:33 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation about the cold continues. A phrase, I mean, I never thought I'd say that. What are we going to do on the show today? Should we do the food chain? The crisis in the food supply network? The warning from the NFU that we did that yesterday. What should we do? Should we do Harry and Meghan? That's a great tale, isn't it? Everyone getting their knickers in a right old twist about a programme that hasn't even gone yet. No, let's not do that. Let's not do that. We did it yesterday. Could talk about the football, I suppose. Oh, come on, Morocco. That was an astonishing performance. And poor old Cristiano Ronaldo, eh? Honestly, when you prioritise yourself above your teammates, who could possibly have predicted that you could end up being hung out to dry in that way? Oh, I don't know. No, we're going to talk about how cold it is. Has James taken leave of his senses? He's not working for OAPFM. No, I'm not. But I tell you, my inbox is absolutely humming with, or buzzing is probably a slightly better word to use in that context. It only hums when we go to Idiot's Corner, which I don't think I'll do today. I'll tell you what will be in Idiot's Corner. It will be something like, well, my grandma had to scrape the ice off the inside of her window every morning. Young people today don't know they're born, which is great. And obviously you haven't bothered installing central heating in your house or doing anything to improve the standard of living that you enjoy from the days when your grandma was scraping ice off the ceiling every morning in order to melt it down and make her morning cup of tea. Such an odd mindset, such an odd worldview, and yet a not uncommon one, except at times like this when it's so widespread. Julia in Chelmsford next. Before that, the Health Secretary says that there is no shortage of antibiotics nationally. This alongside a warning to remain vigilant for signs of Strep A. I'm also reading a story, by the way, that a formal request for the armed forces to drive ambulances during the strikes on December the 21st is expected to be made today. The Department of Health is in talks with the Ministry of Defence. Everything's going swimmingly. I don't know that I trust the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, and I wonder whether anybody listening to this is better placed to tell us whether we should be worried or not about shortages of antibiotics. So I'll probably open the phone lines for that in a minute. But let's talk to Julia in Chelmsford first. Julia, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Well, to be honest, so many things that you said this morning has resonated, from actually your own household to lots and lots of other people that have called in. I work at home. I'm heating the person, not the home.
Yes.
I'm sitting with the fingerless gloves and an electric blanket. The dog's wrapped up in it as well.
Good grief.
But the thing is that there's my husband and I feel, especially from I think one of the messages that you read out about the lady with coats and mould and her children.
Yeah, mould is terrifying.
I know my husband and I, we are very lucky. We've not had an awful, we don't have an awful lot of the worries. So I don't want to feel feeble by phoning in.
No, I understand.
But
this is the way, and I'm happy to reiterate this. This is how we illustrate the strength and the size of the problem is by reflecting today on people who can't quite believe they're caught up in it.
Absolutely, it's to me, it's the fear of the unknown of my bills in the future, and when it's now become. For both of us, how long can we go before we actually switch our heating on? And we are,
have you not turned it on at all yet?
No, we haven't.
And you're in agreement on this, because often in families there's a bit of a disagreement between, is there one who wants to turn it on and one who doesn't?
Well, I mean, I would, but my husband never wants to spend the money. But I've also now got to that point where if we can manage, we're just confining ourselves to. We're very lucky. We've got a little sofa in our kitchen and watch the telly. And my husband joked. He said we should get our sofa bed in there and we'll just wash in the sink and not use the rest of the house. But it's because it's that fear of the unknown of what might come further down the track if we put it on. That's my concern. And so, I'm lucky that yes, I work at home. I'm in a little office at the top of the house, so I'm hoping whatever little bit of heat there is just stays with me. But the rest of the house is pretty cold. But we'll manage. And yes, I'm assuming at some point we will switch it on. But whether it's just
what will be the thing? Will it be? I mean, is it like the clock is ticking now, or the or the temperature will reach a certain point? What's going to flick the switch?
I think it will be if we are just, regardless of sitting with a blanket or in bed with as many covers and socks on, that we're still cold.
God.
That's because I just...
It depends how good. I mean, again, wealth is relevant because you can warm up in bed, but it depends in large part on the quality of your bedding, on the quality of your bedclothes, and the quantity. I mean, if you haven't got a fancy duvet, then you've got 6 blankets in there.
Just put another dog. We just put another dog on the bed. That helps.
Well, you laugh, and it's good that we can laugh, and we all need to laugh. But this is just crazy, isn't it? I wonder how long it's going to last.
And that's the thing, is that we never really, I think like you said yourself, never paid a huge amount of attention to your heating bills, those utilities. You paid them. It was just part and parcel. It ticked along as it always had. And then suddenly it's all increased so much. And so, yes, we are very lucky. And that's why when I hear so many of these breaking stories of these people that are suffering so much at the hand of poor housing, and I'm not in that situation. As I say, I'm very lucky, which is why I don't want people to think I'm a woe is me, because yes, I could afford to put it on, but I don't.
But you're not, and we're now in. We're heading towards -10s, heading towards, and there's cold snap coming in. What is it? December the 7th. And people still not turning. I mean, it used to be funny. We could tease our dads about it. It used to be a competition. I'm not turning it on. We're not having it on until November, I think, was what we may have said. But it wasn't because you couldn't afford it. It's because you're conscious of the cash, not actually worried about not being able to pay it, just not wanting to pay it. That's why Dad used to go around the house turning all the lights off. This is different, and this is new, and this is weird. And I don't know that it is easy to apportion blame or to point fingers, because not for the first time I find myself wondering exactly what is happening in other countries, other comparable economies. Most obviously, I suppose, other northern European countries. Right, what is happening there? Are we being hit harder? I saw comparisons of our energy bills that didn't make us look good, and I saw comparisons of what governments were doing to help, which didn't make us look good. But I don't have the full picture. It was 10:41. We'll stay with this till 11. So if you can tell me what's happening in other countries. If you're listening to this overseas, particularly if you grew up in Britain, and you're thinking, yeah, it's bad, but it's the same here, or you're thinking, holy moly, either O'Brien and Julia and everybody else has completely lost the plot, or things back at home, things back in the old country, specifically when it comes to the cold and the heating, are off the charts. I can't believe what I'm hearing. I'd love to know that, actually. It might be an odd phone call to make to a radio station to say, no, James, not remotely surprised. It's exactly the same here in Germany or France or Sweden. But if you're listening to this with a lot of experience of Britain over the years and you're thinking, oh my days, what? Then I'd love to hear that as well, because what's happening in your country is measurably different from what's happening in your old country. Thank you, Julia. Stay safe and indeed stay warm if you can. Dogs are worth their weight in gold at the moment, aren't they? And cats. If you can get the cat to settle down in your lap, that's at least a little bit of a corner of coziness. Maria is in Manchester. Maria, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm a first-time call. I hope you're good.
I'm very well, actually. And obviously, I've got the heating on in the studio. I might be wearing a scarf, but that's more to protect my throat from viruses and what have you.
Yeah, the lurg is going around big time, isn't at the moment.
What do you want to say?
Yeah, so all it is, a couple of years ago, a friend of mine, she was picking her child up from school, and she said, are you looking forward to your break, your half-term break? And the little lad said no. And she said, why? She said, well, it's cold at home and we don't get any lunch. So from that, she started up a charity called Mums on a Mission, which I'm an active member of. And from that, I sponsored a family, two families a couple of Christmases ago, which I still do, to take a Christmas dinner and some Christmas Eve food down to the house. Anyway, the girl is still seen now. I went to the house Christmas Eve. There was no heating on, no lighting, and I gave her the food, and it was a bit teary and what have you. And I come away and I thought, how ignorant is this of me? I thought, there was no heating and no lighting on, and it's because she couldn't afford to put the heating and the lighting on.
Good grief.
So, yeah, so I'm still in touch with her. She had COVID last week, and I messaged her to see if she was okay. She said, I am, but I'm freezing. So she said, I can't afford to put the heating on, and obviously at home all day with the COVID now. So on two occasions, I'm not doing it to big myself up, James. I have put money in a bank account to help her with heating. So this is the extent and the height of the problem that's happening everywhere. You know, I mean, I'm lucky again. I can put my heating on. I'm very, very fortunate. I said to my partner last night, how lucky are we? But the charity is seeing more and more people asking for not just food, but for clothes to just keep warm now.
Actual clothes. I mean, we used to send them overseas, didn't we? We used to have the banks outside the supermarkets, and you'd put your clothes in a... I think there was one near the fire station in Chiswick that actually specified that it would be going domestically. But the idea that people need clothes for warmth reasons.
Yeah, what we do there's a place called Openshaw in Manchester. There's another charity there, and I know some other places do it, and they wrap coats around trees, and they put rails out on some streets for people to help themselves to second-hand coats and clothes.
Well, I mean, for once, I know the answer to the question I often ask when we're having chats like this. I say, what does the light at the end of the tunnel look like? It looks like spring.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. I mean, this is like a rural economy, isn't it? We're waiting for the seasons to change so that our lives can change. Usually it's just the clocks going back because of the light and the dark and the mornings and the evenings. But this is actually, my life will begin to get back to normal when things start to warm up again.
Exactly. And to this date now, the girl, she's also in the trap of, if I get a job, I can't afford to pay for somebody to pick my kids up to and from school. So then her benefits get cut if she goes to work for a couple of hours a day. Her benefits get cut. There's all that goes on behind the scenes as well. So you try and do something to, in her eyes, better herself and get a career. But as soon as she starts working, everything stops. At one point, she was walking an hour a day, working in a cafe for a few hours and walking back in the rain. I mean, that's just. I mean, when I see those photos of the girl, she's got quite healthy looking. She's probably a good size 12, 14. She must be a size 6 now because she's told me numerous occasions she skips meals to give the kids the food.
And that will be relatively normal, and of course it will be reaching into areas where no one ever expected it to reach before. But Maria, you remind us very helpfully and importantly of the people that would have been in shtuck even if energy bills hadn't gone through the roof, and the shtuck that they're in is considerably deeper than the shtuck that they would have been. Thank you. 10:46 is the time. 10:49 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We live in Portugal, James. Our electricity was decreased by 3% recently. Yesterday we received another letter to tell us of another 3% decrease starting in January. You lot are being mugged. The French government own the energy companies and have limited increases to 4%. They may be allowed to rise to 15% next year. The French government is making payments to those who use wood or wood pellets to subsidise the cost. We've received a cheque for €250 as help. Large gas canisters are used a lot. The price has not significantly increased over the past 2 years. A 1,000 litre of fuel oil has increased and decreased depending on the market price. The price is now about €1,500. That's not enormously helpful to me, Richard, in some areas, but a lot of people listening will find that it has much more pertinence for them. I'm just sort of scrolling through my inbox to see what else I can find. Another one from France. This is from Mal. We have inflation, but it's not the same. I can afford to heat my home. I also receive energy checks from the government. The UK government did step into that breach as well, of course. I use it against my electricity costs, which were capped at 4% and then 15% next year. We also have hen eggs, which is a reference to yesterday's story about shortages in the food supply chain, most obviously of eggs. And there are more of these examples coming in. Also, plenty of these coming in. Yep, says... let me get this right. For those that can afford it, I urge you to donate your £400 energy rebate to a fuel poverty charity such as National Energy Action, suggests Tom. And I have a 5-year-old and an almost 2-year-old. I can't bear the thought of either of them being cold in their own home. I have to put the heating on to heat the house on cold mornings because they get up, and in the evening to heat their bedrooms at night time. Can we afford the heating bill when it comes? I've no idea, James, but I'll deal with it when it happens. I have to keep my babies warm. My heart breaks for everyone in this situation, says Megan. Paul's in Aylesbury. Paul, what would you like to say?
Firstly, happy Christmas to you and your team. I hope you get what you need. That may be different to what you want.
Well, I'm blessed, as you know, Paul. So need is an odd feast. But so thank you. The same to you and yours.
So am I blessed. I've been married for 40 years. When we first got married, I'm 59 now, but when we first got married, 59 on the 17th. When we first got married, I remember my daughter came home from the hospital and I had a hairdryer and I was literally going up and down the hairdryer along the pipework to stop it from cracking because it was so cold. We had our shampoo freeze that year, right?
Yeah.
So it was freezing. When I was a kid, when I was literally in a pub in Fulham on a Dawes Road called the Salisbury, and we still had slums down the road.
Gosh.
And that's where wallpaper and everything was literally falling off the wall. Mould was actually the same. Now, this is 40 years on. My wife's sitting down worrying about heating, worrying about what's coming up next, seeing if she wants, saying, I'm going to try and get more work, do more work, try and do this, try and do that, because she's worried about the future. The killer is, you remember, you talked about it a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
The bank of mum and dad.
Yes.
Right? Now, the bank of mum and dad was fine because we was all on gas and electricity. It was okay, so you had a bit more extra money you put aside, which in the end went to your kids.
Yeah, of course.
Where is it? Where is that going to be?
They're going to it's as if the kind of it expands, doesn't it? More and more people are going to be squeezed out, so it will still exist for some families, but more and more families. And I know why you're referencing 40 years of marriage, 40 years of, to coin a phrase, playing by the rules, and to come to this now just doesn't.
The thing is, I truly believe, right, this country is being strip mined. Right, it's been strip mined by selling off.
You mean asset stripped? Is that
asset stripped?
Yeah,
the whole lot. I think it's been asset stripped by people who had money and wanted more. And what they've done is they've just done that. You've got people like Amazon who don't pay their way in this country because they're using the legal way to get round it. They're just literally playing with people's lives, and they're treating people like digits.
I wonder, do you know, because you know that you're preaching to the choir on some of this for me, but I do wonder whether the PPE scandals, when they come out in full, we're just getting a little nibble now at the edges with the Michelle Moan story, whether or not more people may wake up.
You can see, right? You can see exactly what it's like, right? What things are being done to keep things pressurised, right? Where they just extend it into the future, so the people who did all of the problems are either dead or it doesn't matter because they're all retired. Take it away completely and look at Grenfell. Just take it away and look at that. Look what the government and look what everyone's doing. They're putting this out to the future, right? Everything like that. All of those, those massive disasters, they literally put it in, we've got to do reports, we've got to do this. Oh, by the way, the person who should go to prison is now dead because he was 40 then and now he's 75.
I hear you, Paul. I really do. Do you want to know? Well, actually, no. I'll save that for another day. Thank you, mate. You stay safe. 10:55. Crikey, is the time. How do we do this? Can't do it every day, but this is going to be... How many people... I wish we had buttons. Do you think we will? And Paul talks about it taking 35 years for a verdict to arrive on a national scandal. I mean, just look at Hillsborough. Look how long it took for those families to get the truth about the lies told about them and theirs. But I wish, in the time that I'm on air, do you think we'll ever have some sort of, with you know, like Alexas and all that business, we'll be able to do genuine surveys, at least with some semblance of scientific accuracy? We say how many people listening to this now would be in a warmer room if they could afford it, or if they thought they could afford it, or if they were less worried about it. How many people are listening to this program right now in colder circumstances than they would ordinarily choose? And then how many people would this time last year have been turning on the heating, would have been turning up the heating, would have been turning on the radiators? Because I just love to know. I have a feeling the numbers would be staggering because this is reaching into almost every corner of the country. 10:56 is the time. Janet is in Amsterdam. Janet, what would you like to say? We may never find out. Is Janet there? But let's find out. Sandy's in Mallorca. It's the United Nations. I sent out my clarion call for foreign correspondents, and here they are. Sandy, what can you tell us?
Hello, it's me again. I know you like my lovely accent.
It makes me homesick, Sandy, doesn't it? Makes me homesick.
No, bless you. Listen, I was telling your lovely lady on the phone, I've just had my electric bill.
Yes.
And it was €32.
Crikey. Is it hot, though? Forgive me for not knowing I mean, I know Mallorca's usually... Is it what's the weather actually like at the moment?
Well, it's not hot.
No.
When it goes down to about three degrees maybe.
I love all that.
2 degrees at night.
Okay, so still, so it is a significant difference between turning the heating on here and turning it on in Mallorca.
Well, of course it is. But the point I was trying to make, sweetheart, is that here my VAT is 5%. I'm getting free transport this year and next year on the trains and on the 70% off on the buses.
Gosh.
And we seem to have a government, I know it's a coalition government, but we seem to have a government who cares about folk. And they care about me, and I'm foreign.
They'll never catch on over here. I think you get some of that here. You do get help with your use of public transport, certainly the buses, certain types a day. But is 5% VAT linked, forgive me for being so indiscreet, Sandy, but is that linked to your age, or does that apply to everybody?
It's linked to my electric bill.
Yeah, I know, but does everyone... No. It's not a special dispensation for ladies of a certain age, is what I'm wondering.
No, it's not. It's because they've done a windfall tax.
Have they?
And I think it's because they can wield a bit more power being part of a big group, so that, they can, put the effort in. And I think they've done a deal with Algeria to get stuff, electric and that coming over. But I think I get the impression you've got a government who doesn't care much. It's more about running the country as a business.
Well, if they're not even running, if they were running it, if they were running it as a business, you'd expect them to turn a profit, wouldn't you? They're not even running it. I don't know what they're running. They don't. Well, for themselves, perhaps some of them do, but I don't know what they're running it as. I think it's just become a post-Brexit. It's become a sort of weird. The Tory party post-Brexit has just become a weird... I don't know what it is, like a circular firing squad or something like that. It's the strangest thing.
No, because the shareholders are the ones up above in the know.
But the Spanish government probably owns more of the railway than the British government does. But anyway, that's a conversation for another day. How's your sister?
It is.
How's your sister?
My sister, she's unplugged the fridge.
Oh, my days. You're
joking.
It's
so cold, she don't need the fridge. And I've told her... So what she needs to do is boil a kettle in the morning and fill flasks.
Yeah.
And then when she wants a cup of tea, she's got warm, hot water in the flask.
And for people who don't remember the last time we spoke, you wanted to get her out to live with you in Spain because she was suffering before the cold snap kicked in.
Yes.
But with Brexit, of course, you can't anymore.
No. I mean, I'm trying to get her out.
I know you are.
But I don't know, sweetheart. I mean, there's got to be a solution some way.
I hope so, and you'll let me know if you find it, won't you?
Oh, yes, I will do.
All right, me duck.
But I mean, keep warm. I wish I could help people because it's not fair.
Well, of course it's
awful.
Not. Everybody does. I mean, except complete weirdos who will be either claiming that none of this is true, none of this is real, or the really strange one, Sandy, will be going on about how, we didn't have much central heating during the Blitz and we coped okay, so everyone should just shut up and get on with it. Why? That's why Paul's called 40 years. Man and boy, working, doing his bit, paying his dues, following the rules, playing the game. And then his wife's sitting in the dark watching telly because she's frightened of turning the lights on. 1 minute after 11 is the time. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I was going to talk about 250,000 young Britons planning to never get a job, which is certainly the most arresting headline of the morning. It's a poll of 18 to 24-year-olds, which found 227,000 of them currently out of a job and not studying claim they never intend to enter the labour market. But we may get onto it tomorrow. All right, we've got PMQs coming up at 12, and I just feel that perhaps these experience-based conversations that are not pretty or uplifting, we can only do so many of them in a day together, can't we? So let's talk instead about something I have been fascinated by since it started. We're going to talk about Just Stop Oil because they were back on the road yesterday in South London, disrupting traffic with a slow march. This came as two other activists were convicted of causing criminal damage to a John Constable painting. Again, it's so easy with this subject to turn it into a slanging match. And, sometimes I enjoy a slanging match, but I do think that any lazy attack upon these people has to be underpinned with a question about what you would do to bring this issue to the forefront instead of what they're doing. And you would be as effective. So you would have as much success. You would garner as many headlines. You would get as much coverage as they get by throwing soup at paintings or gluing themselves to the motorway. That's the whole point about their mission that I have sympathy with, enormous sympathy with the central message. And then you can have a debate about the tactics. But if you're going to have the debate about the tactics, then either you reject the science, you reject the urgency of their mission, which with respect makes you silly, or a Daily Telegraph columnist, or you've got a better idea. So you will say to them, oh, crikey, yes, well, I'll tell you what you should do instead of throwing soup at paintings. You should start a petition. And obviously at that point, everyone goes, oh. Or you should write to your MP. You see what I mean? The tactics are brilliant, whether you like that description or not. It's a factual description. If you see the mission as garnering attention for their cause, not support, because you're perfectly entitled to ring me and say, I used to be the most committed environmentalist in the world, but then a gentleman with a ponytail and a goatee beard threw some soup at a painting, and now I am a fully paid up member of the Global Warming Foundation, and I believe that it's all an enormous scam perpetrated by hippies and communists in order to curtail the activities of good old-fashioned oligarchs. So do you see what I mean? You're probably lying if you tell me that you used to be very sympathetic to the cause, but you are now very much opposed to it because of the tactics employed. In other words, your commitment was so epic and so complete that the behaviour of a few activists has caused you to abandon your support for planetary protection or species protection. So I probably wouldn't believe you if you said that it isn't working in terms of garnering support, but I would certainly accept your argument. The argument I can't accept is that you've got a better idea of how they could attract attention. So the crucial distinction here is between attention and support. And yes, I think if you were completely neutral and you were stuck in traffic and you were late for school or you were late for a medical appointment or something like that, or you heard someone wanging on the radio about imaginary ambulances, then you probably would be less supportive than you were before, but you weren't very supportive to start with. Because if you understood the urgency of the mission, you would appreciate the effectiveness of the tactics. And I got into a little bit of bother last week with the word, or the week before, when I used the word loophole. And it took me a while to understand why. I don't accept all criticism. Obviously, it'd be very, very foolish to accept all criticism. For example, the people who used to criticise me over my explanations of how Brexit was going to work out for them. Although they're very quiet now, that criticism was obviously unfounded and unjustified. People who criticised me yesterday for saying that Barnes Bridge in southwest London was closed to rail traffic and correcting me by saying actually it's Hammersmith Bridge that's closed. They were wrong to criticise me as well, because Hammersmith Bridge is a road bridge, and while it is closed to traffic, it's got absolutely nothing to do with the railways. I could go on, but it would be very boring, even for me. So I did accept the criticism about loophole, using the word loophole, because it made it sound as if they were up to something dodgy or nefarious. All they did, and the reason why there is some defence of me using the word loophole, is that they managed to find a way to cause maximum disruption with minimum risk of arrest. Whereas previously I had understood many of these activists to welcome arrest, in the sense that it added to the attention drawn towards the issue, drawn towards the protest, and it also afforded a patina of martyrdom. You know, the idea that we are prepared to go to jail for our beliefs. It's been powerful throughout time, most obviously, I suppose, with the suffragettes. So the only reason, and I fully apologise for using the word loophole, but I couldn't think of a better word to describe this apparent shift in tactics that allowed the protest to achieve maximum disruption without involving possible arrest. You know, and Extinction Rebellion are trained, did you know this, to relax all their muscles, like a sort of floppy person. A friend of mine got arrested by Extinction Rebellion, and the copper said, the policeman said, he said, are you going to do that thing? And she goes, yeah, I am actually. I have to. He goes, I've got a bad back. He said, please, can't you just, do I have to really, I've got such a bad, and she said, I'm really sorry, but I'm hoping to help save the planet. And I really sympathise with you for having a bad back, but I am about to go all floppy. And apparently it makes it much harder for the police. I think every toddler discovered this. It's an evolutionary moment, isn't it, in the evolution of the human species, when the toddler first discovered that by going completely floppy while lying on the floor of a supermarket, it makes it much, much harder for mum or dad to pick them up. But if it's a full-grown adult that I wonder why it's never caught on in rugby. I wonder why you never see anyone tooling down the wing in a rugby match, and then just as it looks like they're about to get tackled, they decide to go all floppy to make themselves heavier and harder to manoeuvre. But anyway, that's why they do it. So 2 thoughts. First of all, sorry for saying loophole. Julian Suffolk says, march quietly with some pithy banners. Yes, exactly. You come up with a better idea of how they can achieve this level of attention, and I will join you in criticising the tactics that they currently deploy. So that would be point number 1, the tactics issue. Point number 2, I mean, and this genuinely intrigues me. I wonder whether you noticed this. Do you remember when it was Insulate Britain rather than Just Stop Oil? I think they're very closely interlinked, these protest groups, these activists, because Extinction Rebellion was the first one as well. They've got an offshoot called Animal Rebellion, and they're quite ardent vegetarian, sort of anti-farm, meat farming. But it was Extinction Rebellion, wasn't it? And then it was Insulate Britain, and then it was Just Stop Oil. Now, Insulate Britain fascinate me. This conversation, by the way, is going to be about the likelihood or the tactic of walking slowly in the street to disrupt traffic. I don't think the government can change the law. They're going to try. They want to, but I don't think on this one they can. I think the protesters have got them over a barrel. I don't want to live in a country where it's illegal to walk slowly in the street, whatever the ramifications of that may be. But I'm going to invite you to explain to me why I'm wrong, because I've got a feeling I might be, but I want you to tell me. Okay, so that will be the phone in shortly. You can book your place early if you want. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you will need, that you do need. Because Insulate Britain was fascinating. Insulate Britain went from being a phrase used to describe a protest group that everybody was being encouraged to despise to being a government policy really quickly. Think about the conversation we had in the last hour. How many people, well, but why am I saying how many? As if sort of addressing a big crowd. I'm talking to you right now. When we were talking in the last hour about how cold everybody is, did you even think about Insulate Britain? Did you? Did you even think about how many of the people describing the cold in which they are currently existing would be in a much, much, much better situation if their home was brilliantly insulated? It's not as easy to achieve as I may be conveying. You know, some houses are a lot more amenable to insulation than others, but how many people? So Insulate Britain, if in an alternative universe, if the government had responded immediately to Insulate Britain, if they had turned around and said, you know what, these chaps gluing themselves to the motorway have got a rather good point, old boy. I think we should do everything we can. Let's spend a ton of money insulating as many homes in this country as we can. I think it was government policy at some point. My mate Wayne works in this field. I'm never entirely sure what's happened in the context of the support and the subsidy that you get, but I'm pretty sure it's gone down since the last lot of Tories, or since 2010. I think things were moving in the right direction prior to that, or maybe prior to 2015. I'm not sure, but I digress. The point is this: just think. That's how warped the relationship between politics, media and public is in this country now. Is the people who had an answer to a lot of the problems we talked about in the last hour, the people who genuinely understood the benefits from their point of view, the massive reduction in the amount of fuel that we'd use, but from the point of view of people who were cold this morning, the massive reduction in the amount of fuel you'd use at a time when you can't afford it. If your home was brilliantly insulated, you'd be golden. And there was something, I think, in the budget, wasn't there? There was something in the last big announcement about actually now having a programme of insulating homes up and down Britain, which is weird if you're a right-wing media outlet, isn't it? Because you were supposed to be poo-pooing the people who were calling for it 10 minutes ago, and yet now it's Tory government policy, and you're supposed to be cheering it to the rafters. I mean, it's ridiculous. I think it was even in Boris Johnson's manifesto in 2019, but as we all know, that wasn't even worth the paper it was printed on. So these are merely questions for future episodes of University Challenge. They've got absolutely nothing to do with the lived experience of ordinary British people. So here it is, right? Just Stop Oil continued their climate protest by disrupting traffic with a slow march in South London yesterday. About 15 of them unfurled banners emblazoned with Just Stop New Oil about 8 o'clock down in the Elephant and Castle. And police said they walked alongside the group so that they could act if offences were committed. So it meant that motorists had to inch along the Old Kent Road. I use these reference points. I appreciate most people, or many people listening, don't have the A to Z of London, or they haven't done the London cabbies' knowledge. But Old Kent Road's on a monopoly board, so you'll allow me to at least use that one. So the traffic was inching along the Old Kent Road, and imagine if it was a major road near where you are. And the disruption was entirely successful, but the activists couldn't really be touched. No arrests were made. The police said a small group took part in a protest. At some points, the groups walked in the road, which caused disruption to traffic for short periods of time. It is the Met's role to provide a proportionate response to protest. 11:17 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number. Now, whether you are a passionate protester, whether you are an innocent bystander, a concerned citizen, a frustrated motorist, or a police officer, I'm going to make a suggestion now that I want you to respond to. I think this is game over. I don't think that the police can or should arrest them. I think they have found the perfect way to protest. Do you agree or disagree? 0345 6060 973. Not a single arrest was made, but footage showed the activists wearing orange high-visibility jackets walking all the way to St. Paul's Cathedral with presumably huge tailbacks of traffic behind them where they held a rally. No arrests were made. What do you reckon? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Is this actually... And actually, let me rephrase that question slightly. Is it completely unfair to expect the police to do more? I'm here to tell you that it is. The way I understand that story and the law, the police can do nothing else, even if they wanted to, and that's why it's a brilliant piece of protesting from the point of view of the Just Stop Oil organisation. There you go. So number one, they've got them. This is it. They've found it. The perfect protest. 0345 6060 973. Number two, the police can't do anything, and we shouldn't expect them to. That is what happens when you live in a rules-based society. They have made the rules work for them, and to castigate, criticise, or condemn the police for this would be just a bit dumb. All right, it might make a nice headline, but in terms of actually reporting and reflecting reality, it would be stupid. 0345 6060 973. 21 minutes after 11. So, what would you do that would be more effective? And I am calling for everybody to leave the police alone when it comes to a Just Stop Oil protest, if it involves walking slowly in a road. I'm suggesting to you that this is the perfect protest. They have stumbled upon the perfect protest. Yes, it disrupts traffic, which draws attention, which gets coverage. But in terms of what the police can realistically do, you do not want to live in a country where people get arrested for walking. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Joe says, cracking strategy. Well done them. No rules broken. However, Leaky Sue or whoever comes next will probably introduce a law against it. What would that law look like? What would that law look like? Mark's in Birmingham. Mark, what would you like to say?
Oh, James, good morning. Just as an update on this, I was part of an organisation called RAGE, which was the Relatives Action Group for the Elderly, which in the early 90s worked as part of communities and unions in Birmingham and then across the whole of the UK in stopping the closure of public sector council-run care homes. Now, in Birmingham in particular, but across the country, we rolled out a programme of what we called road rages, where, this is about 2001, we had about 200 people on either side of a Pelican Crossing on one of Birmingham's four main arterial routes into the city. And outside a care home, in this case it was Normanhurst in Erdington, where I live. And basically the local priest was there, Father Peter Spencer, And we pressed the button. 100 people crossed over the road, 100 people the other side crossed over. And by the time it went to orange and then to green, people were still crossing because there's loads of residents in the wheelchairs, bringing visibility of these people whose home was under threat by the city council, Blairite Council, hasten to add. And then what happened was, of course, it went back to red again. The cars had to stop, and we built up these 7-mile tailbacks going all down the M6 into Sutton Cobb. Birmingham came to gridlock. Now, the police turned up. Father Peter Spencer pointed them in my direction as the organiser for the rage, and the police just came up to me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "We're crossing the road." And they went, "Great, best of luck," and off they went.
Oh, I do think the police are damned if they do and damned if they don't in these sort of situations. But your protest was technically different in that, the law governs. Well, actually, does it? You're crossing the road at a pelican crossing, so you're doing the same in a way. Although that's a barrier rather than a moving obstacle, isn't it? But the principle you think is the same.
And we won. We broke the back of the boom, Labour group, and the 30 public care homes were saved. That was 1,200 beds, which had in. Yep, and it's all covered. There's a book by Professor Dexter Whitfield called Public Service or Corporate Welfare, where he summarises the activities of RAGE during that 5-year period. We stopped thousands of care bed closures across the country. When the Labour government were using a system called best value to close them. And, of course, that meant then the crisis we've now got in social care is because the vast majority of the 200,000 public care beds have gone. And that's why...
You were a bit ahead of the game, weren't you? You were a bit... Just to clarify one thing for me... James O'Brien, this is a text from Trumpton. It was a very funny account. James O'Brien appears to have discovered a new way of protesting. It's called a protest march. Just to be clear, an official protest march is cleared with the police and a route is agreed. So this is the whole point about this action, is that it is impromptu. Do you think that they, as you were, are completely insulated from the law on this?
Yes. Because if they're just walking down the street, as we were crossing a zebra crossing or a pelican crossing, you're just doing a daily function. It's not a protest; it's just walking. And so what we had when we had all these lovely elderly people who, in their wheelchairs with their families, going backwards and forwards slowly across the road, we had people lined up on the road itself, handing leaflets to the cars. God. And I'm telling you now, James, 99.9% of those people in the cars were supporting us because they knew about the state of public elderly care and care beds in general. Yeah. And it raised the profile. Even ITV News turned up in a helicopter from memory.
Fantastic.
And
they'll do anything to get the helicopter out, though. I've got to tell you, these journalists are a right old bunch of children when it comes to, can we get the helicopter? Let's get the helicopter. Oh, fantastic. Get the helicopter out. I love this. And one of the reasons I love it is it poses that eternal question of where the tipping point is. Because when Extinction Rebellion started, and you could tell that Fleet Street was getting ready to write about, the usual suspects or son of Swampy or whatever it was, and it was like retired teachers and local vicars, and they couldn't quite get the usual bile didn't quite work because these people were not professional protesters or cliches or something like that. I wonder where the tipping point is. If you're held up, so the police said yesterday, we know it's frustrating to see them walking slowly in the roads, but as they have been small in number and traffic is able to move around them, we are less likely to be able to arrest and prosecute them. So there's obvious danger involved, there's risk involved. But if they look like, this is why you mentioned the elderly people and the people in wheelchairs. It depends for a lot of us, we're quite human, we're quite basic, aren't we? It depends what they look like. If they look like people who, to quote the Daily Mail, have never done a day's work in their life, it's going to be a lot easier to get frustrated than it is if they look like the people you describe on your protest.
Yeah, and the weirdest thing was, James, as a footnote to all this, is that the RAGE campaigns, organisational strategies, were then studied by academics, and in fact, when I pointed out to them I was asked to speak at a number of meetings about this. I'm a full-time union official then, and I am now.
Right.
And I've always done community organising and representation for communities. And one of the things that struck me was that the whole basis of this whole elements of the strategies were based on quite bizarrely a book called Detroit, I Do Mind Dying, which was about a 1960s small black militant group in America who developed strategies in Detroit to stop the brutalisation of car workers by Ford and the other companies. And all I did was just read that book and then adopt some of those strategies to bringing home the message to a wider community. And I say in Birmingham and in Norwich, I could go around the country, all the care homes we saved during that 5 to 10 year period by bringing the issue home to the public, which I think now the unions are doing in respect of their members' pay and conditions.
I am fascinated by this. We didn't have this conversation today. We had it yesterday a bit, and we'll be having it again in the future. But they are now I saw one newspaper, no prizes for guessing which one, talking about the Kremlin and communists, and the Daily Mail this morning saying that Labour trying to, it'd be interesting. This will come up at PMQs. Keir Starmer takes a lot of criticism for being lukewarm. Or indeed not supportive at all of strike action, but it won't stop your deeply dishonest right-wing newspapers trying to draw these parallels. But you're going to struggle to argue that these unions are trying to bring the country to a standstill or on a political mission to bring down the Tories when the cost of living crisis is so obvious and acute to so many. They are trying to get a better deal for their members. And who here right now doesn't wish that somebody was trying to get a better deal for them? Back to the first hour of the programme, sitting in a blanket watching the telly or wearing your inside coat or just dealing with the fact that you can see your own breath at the dinner table. Would you like somebody somewhere to be going into battle for you at the moment, or are you quite happy to sit there swallowing bilge about the Kremlin or communists or the Labour Party or the unions being the paymasters of the Labour Party? That may prove to be an early heads up on what PMQ sounds like later today, but we will find out. I'm with Mark on this. I don't see that criticising the police is any use at all. The law is there to protect us all, including protesters. And they found a way to disrupt traffic that doesn't involve breaking the law to an arrestable level. Lottie Morley's here now with the headlines. 33 minutes after 11 is the time. And I don't see that the police could or should do anything about this particular type of protest. But I do find it fascinating for a whole heap of reasons, but not least because if we'd insulated Britain when Insulate Britain were protesting, then an awful lot of people would be a hell of a lot warmer right now in this country. And some people quibbling. I tell you what, you want to quibble what Sandy was telling us, you're picking a fight with the wrong lady. Quibbling her comments about the 5% VAT on gas in Spain. It was enacted in October of 2022, as far as I can tell, that decision to cut VAT on gas from 21% to 5%. It will also cut value-added tax on gas to 5% from 21% in October 2022 in order to reduce the effect of rising international price on household utility bills. So don't doubt, you can doubt me, but don't doubt Sandy. Anthony's in Brighton. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
I'm a second-time caller, a long-time listener,
Good
back
man.
to the days of Brian Hayes and Michael Van Straten.
Wow.
I just wanted to say that where you were saying that it was the perfect form of protest, the oil people, and that there was nothing that the police could do to arrest them, I don't think that's actually true, because I think that technically there's a law of obstruction under the Highways Act, which could be enacted.
Which is the difference? Clearly they probably could, but I was basing it on what the Metropolitan Police tweeted yesterday, which was, we know it's frustrating to see them walking slowly in the roads, but as they have been small in number and traffic is able to move around them, we are less likely to be able to arrest and prosecute.
Yeah, but that's going to be like a variable. That's going to be they'll have made a political decision not to do that in this particular instance.
Well, they're not a political decision.
Well, if you look at
it's a policing decision, because they arrested one of our journalists the other day for simply being in the wrong place at the right time, or the right place at the wrong time.
When I say political decision, I would suggest that often policing decisions are political, in the sense that on some days when things are, flavour of the month, police will act very harshly on it, and they won't on other days, and that depends on the political will. In terms of the pure legality of it.
I completely understand what you're saying, and you may well be right, but I just for the point of reference, I disagree with you on this. I think that they have made a completely policing decision. They've looked at the fact that the traffic can get around the protesters, and they have decided they would struggle to make any charges stick on this case. Whereas if they're gluing themselves to the road, it's an open and shut case.
It doesn't. The obstruction doesn't have to be absolute. I read it just before.
No, I know. But we're talking about what the police exercising discretion. It may be for political reasons. I just don't think it is, because I haven't noticed any particular reluctance on the part of the police to arrest environmental protesters so far.
But that's the point. It's
yes.
discretion, isn't it?
Yes.
If somebody was arrested for obstruction in that instance and they were taken to a police station, would they have a strong case to say, "Hey, you couldn't obstruct me. I wasn't causing an obstruction.
Exactly.
Could get around." Probably wouldn't,
Yeah, exactly.
So it's always going to be a bit of a grey area. But,
well, then I would come back with my zinger, which is, why are there reports this morning that Suella Braverman wants to change the law?
She probably doesn't understand the law.
That was an open goal.
Yeah, and neither did her predecessor. And I say this, I'm saying this as someone that has all of the sympathy in the world with these protesters. And can I just raise another point?
Yes, of course.
Do you remember the guys who were doing the letting the tyres down, the extinguisher people?
Yes.
So I'm for my sins, I have an SUV car. My tyres were let down one evening. And after the initial rage of, oh my God, I can't believe somebody would do that to me. They haven't done a full audit to see, how my life is.
Yes.
And, whether I cost more than somebody else environmentally. After that initial rage, I was kind of, actually, you've got a point. You're right. I shouldn't have this car. And then I started looking into getting rid of my car and buying another one. But it's like, unless there's a scrappage scheme, I'm just passing this car on to somebody else. I'm not burning.
I've got the same issue. We've got the same issue with ours as well. And also, we're in a position to do that. It's going to cost us money unless you're very lucky and your car's worth an awful lot of money and you're going to swap it out for a cheaper one. But someone will be driving the bigger one around.
But even if you do, somebody else is going to be driving my car. Are they going to go and let their tyres down? And at the same time as having all the sympathy in the world with these people, and they did make me think, I think sometimes that there are things that they haven't necessarily considered in making that particular protest. And I'm applying that more to the people that let people's tyres down rather than...
I didn't like that one. I just imagined it happening to my mum or something. It's unlikely to happen to my mum because she drives a tiny little thing. But, you don't know. As you point out, you could be struggling to get around a bit. You might not necessarily have a disabled badge in the car. It might be one of the ones that you only take out of the glove compartment when you're parking. It just seems...
You could drive once a month.
You could, exactly. Or not at all. I mean, it might be up on bricks, exactly. Metaphorically speaking. You couldn't slash the tyres of a car that's up on bricks, Anthony. Even my limited knowledge of matters motoring is enough for me to know it's up on one wheel. Is that? Yeah, I mean, as you say, the police perhaps in other circumstances could have come down a little bit heavier. And I think I probably misspoke as well. Julie points out that just prior to Charlotte Lynch's arrest, many commentators had been hammering the police day after day for not being oppressive enough with protesters. That may have been one result. I tend not to come across that kind of commentary as much as perhaps other people do, but I don't hesitate to believe it for a moment. Attacking the police is a hobby of a certain type of commentator until it affects them, of course. I'll never forget that wonderful call that we took during lockdown from a female police officer. I just mentioned that because I remember it. I remember her voice, and she just said, everyone loves the police until they're the ones being policed. It's usually people who think that stop and search is a great idea, usually old white men who think that stop and search of young black men is a brilliant idea. And you sort of go, well, why? Because, well, nothing to hide, nothing to fear. It's absolutely fine. I'd be quite happy to be ordered to turn my pockets out 3 times a week, in the full knowledge that I've got nothing on me. It's an absolute balderdash. The biggest load of bills you're ever going to encounter. And then when the lockdown started and the same people, the same old white men who were perfectly happy to be stopped and searched all the time, were simply told they're going to have to keep a fairly close eye on where they can and can't go for a walk. And you'd have thought, I mean, the sound of these squealing babies could be heard from space. The impact of dummies being thrown from prams could be I mean, it would send shockwaves through the entire population. Old white right-wing columnists and commentators who spent their entire lives adamant that stopping and searching young black men with no reason or suspicion whatsoever except the colour of their skin was a perfectly reasonable police tactic had the hissy fits on a level you would not believe when it was suggested that the police might just feel their collar if they were found walking somewhere more than 2 miles away from their home or whatever the rule was at the time. It was objectively hilarious, but also, of course, tragic. So I'm sure Julie's right when she says that a certain type of columnist or commentator is queuing up to castigate the coppers for this, despite, of course, not having any better answers to the problem and having completely forgotten about all the tears they shed at the prospect of being told by the police to go home when they were out for a walk during lockdown. John's in Maidstone. John, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello,
basically, first time caller. I've never called you before. Listen to your programme all the time.
Thank you, mate.
Yeah, no worries. Obviously, I'm a police officer.
Well, you say obviously. I can't see your uniform.
No, you can't. I'm not wearing one at the moment. Whee! Anyway, so what I'm basically saying is they have done the perfect kind of way of doing it. They're just walking along the street. There's absolutely nothing we can do. We can follow them, absolutely. See if they go into the road, and then we do our stuff. But they're just walking on the street. There is absolutely nothing we can do. We see them walk into the pub. They come out of the pub, and they walk along the street again. We just follow them. That's all we do. We've got specially trained officers for that do that. And I was on Stop the Oil aid a couple of months ago.
Oh, yeah.
And we was based in, I can't tell you where I was based,
of course.
But I was travelling and I was in a car, and we can't do nothing about it. We just follow them. We can't do nothing about it. That's all I'm going to say. They've done the perfect...
Are you frustrated by that? You don't have to go into too much detail about where your personal sympathies lie, but you don't sound particularly frustrated.
No, I'm not frustrated at all. Not frustrated at all. Because it's like an easy day. We're just going to follow it. It's an easy day for us.
You don't have to, I don't want to be cut. I don't want to be pulling them off the road when they've gone all floppy.
No.
It's
great. You don't have to, you're just saying, all right, mate, you're just talking to them naturally like normal people. And carry on as you do.
The cars behind are going to be getting a little bit frustrated.
Of course they are.
Yeah.
Of course they are.
But that's the only reason we're talking about it. If it wasn't affecting anybody, we wouldn't be having you wouldn't be turning up at all, and we wouldn't be talking about it on the radio now.
Absolutely not. We wouldn't be turning up at all. We'd be letting them do their stuff, walk along. We'll have other officers, what we would call local officers, walking along the road. Thank you very much. Where we would be out on our what we do normally, and we would do what we have to do, and we'd be going to all the things we have to go to. I can't tell you go into it what I do. But
no, I'd hear you, but you are, as it were, at the coalface. How much of a palaver is it when people go all floppy? Am I exaggerating it slightly?
It's a bit of a nightmare, yeah. It's a bit of a nightmare because you say, oh, please, mate, just get up. And when they stick themselves to the floor, we're like, oh, we're not the French police. We can't just lift you off.
No, we can't just peel you off the tarmac. Like the French wouldn't even pause.
Well, I won't say what they will do.
No, you don't. It's a different form of policing, as you will know. It's not actually policing by consent, even though just on the other side of the channel. John, thank you. And thank you for all that you do, especially on the days that are slightly harder work than policing a walking protest by Just Stop All. There you heard. So straight from the horse's mouth, both sides, from the protester and indeed from the police. They've got this right, so they probably would. Anthony's legal quibbles notwithstanding, there probably would be a requirement to change the law in some sense to get this. So it'd be great, wouldn't it? Looking at the state of this country. Ambulances not turning up when old people have falls. 12 years of Tory rule now, coming home to roost. And the idea of Suella Braverman going to court so that the police can arrest people walking in a road is perfectly easy to believe. Perfectly easy to believe. We're really in the twilight zone now. And the only question is, how long is the twilight zone going to last? Because technically we don't have to have a general election until January of 2025, which is all a neat setup for the fact that PMQs will be upon us in about 15 minutes. 11:49 is the time. Have we stumbled across the perfect protest? How dare I describe it as a loophole? I apologise again for that misnomer earlier. It's a rather beautiful piece of what would you call it? The a collision of protest and policing. Should we go to Idiot's Corner? Here's Idiot's Corner. James O'Brien encouraging police wastage of time rather than pursuing real criminals. Not funny, mate. Thanks, mate. How am I? What? What would you? What? So you don't think the police should attend when there is a walking protest in the middle of the street? Okay, that's fine. And the real criminals, of course, will be the drivers that then get into trouble for taking the law into their own hands, as some deeply irresponsible people may possibly consider them to do. I don't know what I feel about Idiot's Corner. Do you think it's too rude? Does it spoil the brand of kindness, contempt for the con, and compassion for the con? Is Idiot's Corner a contradiction to that? I don't know. Should we have a staff meeting about it after the show? Should we do that? Is everyone free? Are you free? Is everyone free? Theo, are you free? We'll have a chat. Shall we? Everyone welcome. So we just need a room. Can you book a room that can seat 1.3 million people? Can we do that? Slightly higher than that, actually, I believe. But possibly some people will be on lunch. Angela is in Ormskirk to steer us back to the conversation about protest and about Just Stop Oil. Angela, what would you like to say? Are you free for the staff meeting after the show today?
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic.
I'll join in.
Excellent. Look forward to it. What did you ring in to tell me?
You were asking about whether Suella Braverman would be wanting to change the law. I'm afraid Priest Patel already got there ahead of her.
With the public order bill?
The public order bill has been very quietly slipped through. It's gone through the third reading in the House of Commons. It's now on the committee stage in the House of Lords. But one of the things, it covers all manner of different types of protests.
Yes.
And it introduces amendments to previous legislation for things like assemblies and processions and one-person protests and so on. But one of the major things that I've only seen it reported once, and it's really worrying, is this idea of a serious disruption prevention order, which can be applied for against anyone who on more than 2 occasions, even if they've not been convicted of an offence, carries out activities, and I'm quoting from it here, related to a protest, resulted in or were likely to result in serious disruption to 2 or more individuals or to an organisation in the last 5 years.
Gosh.
And that's a prevention order that effectively allows people's movements to be monitored. And if they do anything involved in a protest that could breach that prevention order, whether or not they do anything that commits a separate offence, for the protest itself, they then commit an offence for breaching the prevention order.
And how likely is the Lords to put a lid on this?
Well, it's gone through first and a second reading, and I don't know. It's now at committee stage, and you would hope that there would be some concerns, grave concerns raised about this, because it doesn't even relate to people who've been convicted of an offence in the last 5 years. You've just got to have been involved in, or even encouraging somebody else to be involved in, by the looks of things, protesting on 2 separate occasions in the last 5 years. So ultimately...
it's actually quite a chilling piece of legislation, which...
It is incredibly chilling.
The only mystery then is whether the people like Priti Patel understood what they were doing when they introduced it, or whether they were just preempting Daily Mail editorials. Or both, of course.
I suspect it's both.
Can Theo ask you a question?
Sorry, Angela in Ormskirk, you seem incredibly knowledgeable about the progress of this bill through Parliament. And I was just wondering whether actually it should be Lady Angela Smith, Baroness Angela Smith, whether I might have got that wrong.
Well, I'm afraid my knowledge comes from the House of Lords website. I have been monitoring it because it is something that I came across it. I can't remember which newspaper. Probably it was...
Now, I believe you, but Theo's accusing you of being an undercover baroness.
Absolutely not. I can guarantee you that.
This is outrageous. He wanted me to do it, Angela, and I said, I'm not doing that live on the radio. If you want to ask the lady that question, you can ask her yourself. He's adamant.
No.
He's adamant. I said it. She's in Ormskirk. Baroness Smith, the leader of the opposition in the Lords. She's Baroness Smith of Basildon.
No, if only.
Well, it's a compliment that he thought you were too knowledgeable for an ordinary punter, but you're all over this, and it is deeply worrying. And you're right, it is one of those things. Was it during that Tory leadership shenanigans that this got
No, it was earlier than that.
But the reason why it didn't get as much attention as it should have done is because we were all distracted by the collapse of Boris Johnson, and then that odd woman who became Prime Minister for a while, and then the new fella who's doing his in-betweeners tribute act behind the dispatch box every week. So maybe there'd have been a bigger outcry, or maybe they wouldn't, because, as we said, it does preempt what much of the...
it just seems to have gone really quiet, because I noticed it because I've done a bit of teaching of constitutional law in the past.
Oh, there you go.
So this kind of stuff is really, really
and these are the rights
to me.
These are the hard-won rights that we're kind of just waving goodbye to without really realising. Before you go, Angela, Theo, would you like to apologise? I mean, it's not an insult to accuse...
So there was one when I got this. There was one when I got this.
As long as she's not a Tory peer.
No, she's not, is she? She's leader of the opposition in the House.
There was one when I got this right, James. It was a few years ago, and there was a Sam in Westminster who rang in to complain about...
Me, probably.
No, it was Labour voters getting behind Brexit. It turned out that Sam in Westminster was also working for the Jacob Rees-Mogg campaign.
I remember that.
I was feeling
yes.
Maybe overconfident.
Well, that's 1 out of 2. Angela, thank you. And take it as a compliment that Theo thought that you were a supremely qualified member of the House of Lords on this issue, as opposed to an interested...
I'll get back in my box.
I love that. I'm so glad I got you to do that. Could have been really embarrassing for me otherwise. Quite a lot of people responding to my question about idiot. If you stop Idiot's Corner, we will mount a protest by continuously walking slowly past the LBC offices until it is reinstated. No, James, you can't get rid of Idiot's Corner. You taught me so much over the last 3 years, but sometimes I do slip back into my old habits. And as yet, I've only been told by you that I was close to Idiot's Corner on one occasion. How will my lessons ever be complete if I never get into it? And various other people as well making similar points about the value. It doesn't mean we have to keep it. No one yet calling for me to abolish it. Maybe Idiot's Corner. We shall see. Theo, PMQs on the way. It would be real politicians that conduct PMQs.
But can I just bring you up to date with what's been going on in the Transport Select Committee?
Yeah,
because Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, has been facing questions from this cross-party committee of MPs.
Yes.
Now, it's been chaired by the interim chairman, Carl McCartney, the Conservative MP for Lincoln. His political affiliation is important because he's the first voice you will hear trying to shout down the Labour MP for Exeter, Ben Bradshaw, asking the Transport Secretary about whether Number 10 and the Treasury intentionally scuppered a deal with the RMT by inserting a new set of negotiations about driverless trains, in effect. And actually, they put this in at the very last minute, and the negotiations understandably collapsed.
In the Daily Telegraph on Monday alleged that Number 10 had intervened and put driver-only trains on the table. Excuse me, Chair, this is really important. The Secretary of State is getting away with that without answering the question. You said I was coming after Graham. You said I was coming after Graham.
Jack's been waiting very patiently to ask questions.
I will come back in. I will come back in.
And Secretary of State, if you'll answer it, then we'll move to Jack.
You can't claim you didn't see the splash on Monday in the Daily Telegraph claiming Number 10 at the last minute has added driver-only trains as an issue to this dispute. Was that report incorrect?
Well, I was specifically talking. Mr. Morris asked me a question about a report today, which I haven't seen.
It was on Monday.
On the general
The Secretary of State, did you not see this report, and is it true?
No. I've been very clear that we've... I was asked to facilitate a new offer.
Driver-only trains being introduced by the Number 10 or the Treasury at the last minute. It wasn't on the table before.
On reform, we're very clear.
No, answer the question.
We're very clear we need to see reform.
The question.
On the specifics about detailed negotiations are taking place between employers and trade unions. It's not the government's role to micromanage the detail of the reform.
Mark Harper did not deny that allegation that was, of course, first reported in the Daily Telegraph, and Ben Bradshaw was trying to ask the question, did Number 10, the Treasury, intervene to collapse the negotiations by putting this extra demand in around the future of train, using robots to run the trains rather than actual human beings, and that's what and Mark Harper didn't come back on that, saying, well,
driver-only trains, not driverless trains.
So, apologies. Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. So, I mean, crikey, that would be a different kettle of fish entirely. Although lots of people are making mistakes on this today. One of the presenters on Radio 4's Today programme said to Mick Lynch earlier, well, the guards are still there. Driver-only operated trains surely have a second person on the train. And Mick Lynch came back and said, no, they don't.
Apologies.
So we heard yesterday. Don't worry about that. We heard yesterday from someone who, from a train guard, who had rescued someone who had a heart attack on the train, and who would be dead if it was a driver-only train. And so Mark Harper really coming a cropper there, I think, in the
just not answering the
Conservative MP claiming not to have seen a story on the front page of the Daily Telegraph is I mean, it's unlikely, isn't it?
Moving on to PMQs.
Indeed.
I think there's quite a lot for Keir Starmer to go on this week. The first, I think Baroness Moan, of course. You're looking at me like you don't think.
I don't know, because one of the very interesting things about Keir Starmer is he's oddly averse to open goals. But this is political, this is policy, this is behaviour-driven rather than personality.
And I think
just to say, we're keeping a close eye on the House of Commons when he gets to his feet.
And of course, what Keir Starmer has done successfully previously is to expand it out to why it's important in terms of it being taxpayers' money.
And it's looking big. I mean, the Good Law Project, which Michael Gove coincidentally started attacking earlier this week, have got piles of papers on deals they consider to be in the same ballpark as what Michelle Mone appears to have been involved in.
So you could go on that. We've got 2 U-turns in the last 2 days. Firstly on housing, and then today, of course, on onshore wind, and the fact that the government is now...
It's the third U-turn, is it? So the housing...
on the Levelling Up bill...
Onshore wind, just on that one bill.
One piece of legislation. It's 2 U-turns on one piece of legislation in 2 days. So that offers, of course, an opportunity for Keir Starmer. So I think those are the 2 areas where I think... And what Keir Starmer has tried to do is to portray Rishi Sunak, and this is previously, to portray Rishi Sunak as being weak, as not being in command of his own backbenchers in having to make these concessions, particularly around housing in terms of going back on mandating councils to build so many homes, and the pushback that he's had from MPs like Bob Seeley in the Isle of Wight, Therese Villiers in Chipping Barnet. Their point is that, their residents, their voters in their respective constituencies do not want homes built, and therefore they should be built somewhere else. Of course, home building, the dream of owning your own home, this is what Keir Starmer has made the point. Actually, this is stymieing economic growth. And then, of course, on onshore wind, this is something that Labour supports. The Liberal Democrats support it. But, of course, many Conservative MPs have gone in favour of it. But there are also a significant cohort who are very much against. So
there is a lot to choose from.
There's a lot to choose from.
So we should watch with interest. And sometimes he takes us, of course, by surprise, more so than perhaps we're used to. And packed house, should be fun. There will be attempts. Shall I do some predictions of what Sunak will do? Sunak will try to portray Keir Starmer as being in the pocket of the union leaders, despite the fact that many members of the Labour movement are unhappy with the level of support he shows for strikers in particular and trade unions in general. So it is as if Keir Starmer is saying that I don't do any of these things. It won't stop Rishi Sunak.
And he's got this new piece of legislation to do it with as well.
Strike-breaking legislation.
Yeah, the minimum service
let's see what happens at PMQs now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by welcoming the new Member of Parliament for the City of Chester to her place in this House? It's the best result for Labour in the 105 years we've been fighting that seat, and I look forward to working with her to build a better future for the people of Chester. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party promised the country it would build 300,000 houses a year. This week, without asking a single voter, the Prime Minister broke that promise by scrapping mandatory targets. What changed?
Mr. Speaker, let me start by also welcoming the Honourable Lady to her place. Now, the Honourable Gentleman comes here every week, and I know he's focused on the process and the politics, but I don't think he's actually taken the time to read the detail of what we are doing to improve our planning system. So let me just explain what we are doing. Mr. Speaker, we are protecting the Greenbelt. We are investing millions to develop brownfield sites. And we're providing support and protection for local neighbourhood plans. Just this morning, the Shadow Housing Secretary said, communities should have control over where homes are built and what sort of homes are built. That's my position, that's her position. What's his position? Mr.
Speaker, Does he really expect us to believe that the member for Chipping Barton and the member for the Isle of Wight are cheering him on because he's going to build more homes? Pull the other one. I'll tell him what changed. His backbenchers threatened him. And as always, the blancmange Prime Minister wobbled. He did a grubby deal with a handful of his MPs and sold out the aspirations of those who want to own their own home. Was it worth it?
Mr. Speaker, as ever, engaging in the petty personality politics, not focused on the substance. Again, let me explain what we're doing. We're delivering what I said we would do. We're protecting the character of local communities. We're cracking down on land banking and irresponsible developers. And we're giving people a greater say in their decisions. Just this week, Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the Honourable Gentleman said the government should be giving people more power and control. Now he seems to be opposing that policy. It's only Wednesday. I know he flip-flops, but even for him it's pretty quick.
Mr. Speaker, he's forgotten. Last week I offered him Labour votes to pass these housing targets because this is bigger than politics. The former Housing Secretary on their side said scrapping mandatory targets would, this is his words from their side of the House, be a colossal failure of political leadership. No wonder he doesn't want to fight the next election, Mr. Speaker. The author of the manifesto that they all stood on said it would cut building by 40%, perhaps even more. Why would he rather cripple house building than work with us to get those targets through?
Mr. Speaker, we're not going to work with the Labour Party on housing. You know why? We'll have a look at their record on housing. In London, the former Conservative mayor in 5 years built 60,000 affordable homes. The current Labour mayor, half of that amount. In Wales, we want to build 12,000 homes. What are Labour delivering? Half of that, Mr. Speaker. The Labour Party talks, the Conservatives deliver.
Mr. Speaker, as ever, too weak to stand up to his own side on behalf of the country. Mr. Speaker, I noticed there was another U-turn last night, this time on wind farms. Actually, I agree with that one, but is there no issue on which he won't give in to his backbenchers? Now, Mr. Speaker, how did his colleague, Baroness Moan, end up with nearly £30 million of taxpayers' money in her bank account?
Mr. Speaker, let me say, like everyone else, I was absolutely shocked to read about the allegation. It's absolutely right. It's absolutely right that she is no longer attending the House of Lords and therefore no longer has the Conservative whip. The one thing we know about the Honourable Gentleman, he is a lawyer. He should know there's a process in place. It's right that that process concludes. I hope that it's resolved promptly. But I'll say one thing, Mr. Speaker, because he mentioned, I tell him what is weak. Is not being able to, I'll tell him, and that's not being able to stand up to people. I know he's taken some advice from Gordon Brown lately. Why doesn't he listen to a former minister in Gordon Brown's government who just said, why does the Labour Party refuse to stand up for workers in businesses like pubs and restaurants who will lose business as a result of the train strikes? Labour should stand up for working people. If he's strong, that's what he should do.
Mr. Speaker, it may not seem like it, but he's supposed to be the Prime Minister. This morning, his Transport Secretary said that his flagship legislation on strikes, this is what he said this morning, his Transport Secretary, might want to listen to this, is clearly not going to help with the industrial action we're facing. He should stop grandstanding, stop sitting on his hands, get round the table and resolve these issues. and everyone can see what's happening here. A Tory politician got their hands on hundreds of millions in taxpayers' money and then provided Duff PPE, and he says he's shocked. He was the Chancellor. He signed the cheques. How much is he going to get back?
Mr. Speaker, it's right that he brought up legislation with regard to strikes, and I'm very happy to address it, actually. So, hard-working families right now in this country are facing challenges. The government has been reasonable. It's accepted the recommendations of an independent pay body, giving pay rises in many cases higher than the private sector. But if the union leaders to continue to be unreasonable, then it is my duty to take action to protect the lives and livelihoods of the British public. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, since I became Prime Minister, I have been working for new, tough laws to protect people from this disruption. That's the legislation he's asking about. Will he now confirm that he'll stand up for working people and that he and his party will back that legislation?
Mr. Speaker, he's obviously not heard what his Transport Secretary said about that legislation this morning. And it's obvious why they're so opposed to Labour's plans to clean up Westminster. They all voted for tax rises for working people, while one of their unelected peers pocketed millions flogging dodgy PPE.
Should be ashamed.
Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to raise something that is worrying parents across the country. Our hearts go out to the families of the children who've tragically died from the outbreak of Strep A in recent weeks. I'm very happy to work with the government on this. So can he take the opportunity to update the country on the measures the country is taking to keep children safe this winter?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my thoughts are, of course, with the families of the children who have sadly lost their lives. We are seeing a higher number of cases from Strep A this year compared to usual. What I can say is that the NHS, who I've sat down to talk about this, are working very hard to make sure parents are aware of the symptoms that they should be looking out to, because this can be treated appropriately with antibiotics. There are no current shortages of drugs available to treat this, and there are well-established procedures in place to ensure that that remains the case. And the UK SHA are monitoring the situation at pace, and what they have confirmed is that this is not a new strain of Strep A, so people should be reassured about that. There is no reason to believe that it has become more lethal or more resistant to antibiotics, so the most important thing for parents to do is look out for the symptoms and get the treatment that is available for them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Airbnb-type short-term lets provide a positive experience for many holidaymakers, but too many cause real issues for local communities. In Westminster, we have 13,000 Airbnb properties alone. Does my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, agree with me that it is now time to consider a registration scheme managed by local authorities so councils can properly manage this growing sector?
My right honourable friend, the Levelling Up Secretary, has indeed said that we will deliver a new tourist accommodation registration scheme, something I know my honourable friend has asked for. It will increase appropriate regulation of the sector, better understand and monitor the impact on local communities, and we will also consult on whether planning permissions should be required for new short-term holiday lets, especially in tourist hotspots.
Can I welcome the new leader of the SNP and thank Ian Blackford previously. Stephen?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to begin by paying tribute to my friend and colleague, the Right Honourable Member for Ross Skye and Loch Aber, who has served us with diligence and duty for the last 5 years. Mr. Speaker, he is a giant of the Scottish independence movement. Mr. Speaker, he's seen off not one, not two, but 3 consecutive Tory Prime Ministers. Indeed, he was on to his 4th in recent weeks. And to that latest Prime Minister, I have a very simple question. What does he consider to be the greatest achievement of the Conservative Party in government since 2019? Leaving the single market and customs union, ending freedom of movement, denying Scotland her democracy, or getting the Labour Party to agree with all of the above?
Mr. Speaker, can I start by offering my genuine and warm, heartfelt best wishes to the Right Honourable Member for Ross Guy and Lochaber. I know the whole House will miss his weekly contributions. And may I also congratulate or join the First Minister in congratulating the honourable gentleman on his appointment as a Westminster leader of the SNP. I look forward to a constructive debate with him across the dispatch box. And Mr. Speaker, the answer to this question is actually very simple. The things that we are most proud of in the last couple of years is making sure that we protected this country through the pandemic with furlough and with the fastest vaccine rollout.
Mr. Speaker, far be it for me to offer advice to a near billionaire, but he's going to have to up his game. And here's why, because in the last 15 minutes, a poll has landed which shows that support for Scottish independence has now hit 56%. And support for the Scottish National Party sits north of 50%. So in that context, can I ask the Prime Minister, does he consider that increasing energy bills on households in energy-rich Scotland by a further £500 will cause those poll numbers to rise or to fall?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what we're delivering for households across the United Kingdom, including those in Scotland, is £55 billion of support with energy bills. It will save a typical homeowner about £900 under their bills this winter, with extra support for the most vulnerable. And that is, Mr. Speaker, an example of the United Kingdom and the Union delivering for people in Scotland.
David Morris!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Eden Project North is now getting right to the end of the process. It's gone through right to the levelling up stage 2.
12:16 is the time, and good Lord, it's getting worse and worse. We'll pick over the bones of this week's PMQs with LBC's inimitable, but not infallible, political editor Thea Rushwood after this. Gosh, 19 minutes after 12 is the time. So I think you got everything right this week.
I did, made up for my mistakes before. Anyway, James, moving on. Go on.
I can't put my finger on it yet. I will. I've gone for Will from the In-Betweeners previously. There's a bit of that there. But it's as if he's been given a crib sheet on how to get through it by saying certain things that his own backbenchers will cheer. But eventually they're not. They're going to run out of cheers unless he's actually doing something effective.
So the thinking is that Rishi Sunak enjoys the numbers. He enjoys the spreadsheets.
Yes.
He enjoys the detail of the job of being Prime Minister, just as he enjoyed the detail of the job of being the Chancellor of the Exchequer. But actually, when it comes to the campaigning, when it comes to the head-to-heads with people like Keir Starmer at the dispatch box, or doing interviews with journalists who might give him a hard time, that, a little bit like with Theresa May, just doesn't come that easily to him. He's not a natural at it. And so, as you see in the House of Commons, it sometimes appears slightly stilted or forced, not quite a distance from where Boris Johnson was, when it was almost the opposite, when the detail was a sort of inconvenience that he had to get his head round, or he'd get somebody else to get their head round it. But actually, the head going up against Keir Starmer in the House of Commons was the thing that he enjoyed the most.
Now, in normal circumstances, that would be a salient analysis, and it is accurate. But it is not as if Rishi Sunak is pulling much out of his spreadsheet-inspired hat at the moment, is it? As Keir Starmer points out, he's wibbling and wobbling on pretty much everything that he's put his name to. So, because I was about to say, well, what you really need is a Prime Minister who's a combination of both. From a backbencher's point of view, you want substantive policy, thoughtful policy coming forward and being pushed through the House, and you also want someone who can keep the plebs happy at PMQs. But Sunak's not doing anything.
But when you're a Prime Minister, to be a successful Prime Minister, you need three things. You need time, you need a solid majority, and you need money. At the moment, he doesn't have the money because we know that they're having to raise taxes by £25 billion just to break even. And even then, some of the hard decisions are being made. So he can't spend money on things that he might want to do in order to win votes. He doesn't have a loyal party behind him. There was a number of MPs who were voting for Penny Mordaunt. A number of MPs wanted Boris Johnson to also be Prime Minister, more than his actual majority in the House of Commons of just over 70. And time, he's got 2 years to turn around this fairly dire economic situation into something palatable where he can go to voters ahead of a general election and say, well, I know things might be bad now, but they were a lot worse 2 years ago when I took over, and look at the progress we've made, vote for me rather than the other guy because I'll be able to go even further with another term.
What's
So
he got?
he doesn't
briefly
have any of those big three things.
We briefly had the fastest vaccine rollout, very, very briefly, and it was achieved under EU auspices. I mean, and what was the other one he tried to claim? The furlough. I mean, we gave you a ton of your own money we lent you a ton of your own money.
He's out to help out. So that's the problem. That's the
How
dynamic.
do you think he dealt with the Michelle Mone question, which you did correctly predict would come?
So he fronted it, whereas rather than trying to defend it, knowing that it could come back, and it's not necessarily going to come back because there is inquiries by the National Crime Agency and different investigations that are taking place at the moment, but knowing that it could come back to haunt him potentially, said he was shocked to see the revelations. That's going beyond what his spokesman said earlier in the week, where they said there was an investigation taking place. They wouldn't want to preempt anything. And then he also said that Michelle Mone had the Conservative whip withdrawn from her. We knew yesterday she was taking a leave of absence from the House of Lords, but actually withdrawing the Conservative whip was something that only last week the government was refusing, the Tories were refusing to do. So that is a development.
Well, it is, unless he misspoke, which seems unlikely, doesn't it?
That wasn't a mistake.
What appeared to me to be the case yesterday was that it was her decision to temporarily withdraw from the House of Lords.
So they're two different things.
Yes, exactly. So why was the whip not withdrawn when these allegations first emerged? Why has the whip only apparently been withdrawn after she has stepped away from the House of Lords of her own volition?
That is a very good question.
That's what I'm here for.
That is a very good question. But it gave the Prime Minister, what I would say is the Prime Minister at least had something to say today which would make an announcement of sorts that the whip had now been withdrawn.
Unless they withdrew the whip and then she tried to camouflage it by creating the impression that she'd voluntarily withdrawn.
It's a difficult thing to hold for 24 hours.
Of course it is. Yeah, you're right.
But what I would also say is that it was very clear she was being cast out yesterday when Labour tabled that Opposition Day motion and said, actually, we need to see all of these documents. And rather than actually whipping Conservative MPs to go through the voting lobbies and say, well, we can't release those documents, it'd be inappropriate to release those documents, Tory MPs were told to sit on their hands, abstain, and of course the vote went straight through the House of Commons. So when Michelle Mone Baroness Mone, even I'm getting into your habit now, James, but when Baroness Mone, if she was trying to read the tea leaves yesterday, she would have seen quite clearly that she's being cast out, that
there's not going to be a gathering at the Garrick Club, is there, of people like Charles Moore, the former editor of The Telegraph, and Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg to discuss how we can save Michelle Mone in the way that they did for Owen Paterson when he was caught with his trousers, metaphorical trousers.
But what Keir Starmer did well again, and this is something that he has done well repeatedly, is making the case that this isn't just £29 million that she took out of her company MedPro UK, having lobbied for MedPro to get the contract, £200 million worth of taxpayers' money, by the way. This is our money, it's taxpayers' money. This story matters. It's not a bubble story. No. This is Keir Starmer's argument. It's not something that is that we're all haggling over as politicians and journalists, and we think is more important than actually what's going on in the real world. Keir Starmer has been very successful in putting forward this narrative that actually this stuff matters, that you need to be bothered about it because it's your money and it is being spent in this way, and there needs to be a justification for it.
And of course, a story emerged this morning that another company that she lobbied ministers over is a so-called secret entity of her husband's family office. This was the one that Matt Hancock... Do you know about these diaries of Matt Hancock? So life's too short to read them, but is he genuinely claiming that he wrote them at the time? Because my money would be on, A, they were ghostwritten, and B, they were not a diary at all.
What, that they were sort of filled in?
They've done it in a diary form because he bears more than a passing resemblance to Adrian Mole, so they thought that the diary would be quite a good format. And there's no earthly way he was jotting down things at April of 2020 that were the polar opposite of what the official advice was at the time. But do we know? Do you know? Are you too busy dealing with real things rather than sort of mediocre reality television person?
Having spoken to the person who works for Matt Hancock, they've made the point that everything that he has said can be backed up. And so the argument would be that you can actually write a diary retrospectively because you can go back and look at your WhatsApp messages and emails and documentation.
Yeah, unless, as I suggested yesterday, the phones have all been thrown in the North Sea I tried to look up what happened to Lord Bethel's phone.
Yeah,
because he was caught up in this quite early doors, wasn't he? Again, interesting. I don't know. Did you see Michael Gove swinging at Jolyon Morm and the Good Law Project earlier this week?
No.
Yeah, he was on Twitter doing that. Oh, funny that, given that they're all these vultures are circling now, aren't they? The net is closing in on these deals. So Bethel's one of them. I tried to find out because I forgot. I said it broke, and then I said, "Oh no, he lost it." Yeah. Actually, both were true. He claimed both. He claimed that it had broken, and he claimed that he'd lost it, and then he claimed that it had been wiped and given to another family member. And this would be a phone that contained
lots of information,
WhatsApp exchanges about his involvement in issuing these PPE deals. Yeah. It's not funny. We both smile at these stories because it's just so unbelievably Boris Johnson-ish, isn't it? The utter shamelessness of what apparently is going on.
But of course, this is all going to be part of the scrutiny of the COVID inquiry that takes place next year as well. So that's going to get if the documents relating to PPE MedPro are going to be made public now because that's been a decree from Parliament. Of course, we don't know exactly when they're going to be made available to the Public Accounts Committee and put into the public domain because there is this inquiry that's taking place between with the NCA at the moment. There is also a mediation process between the government and Baroness Mohn as to the value for the taxpayers' money of the contract that was made to MedPro UK, and that we would expect to come to a conclusion fairly shortly, and that would determine that mediation process whether any money needs to be paid back.
Yes, indeed. And the new SNP fellow, just remind people
Stephen
why.
Flynn. So of course, last week we had the resignation of Ian Blackford after more than 5 years in post as the leader of the SNP in Westminster. There was quite a closely fought election between Stephen Flynn and Alison Tullis. Mr. Flynn won last night, and so it was his turn to ask his debut at PMQs. And of course, he was his first question was trying to criticise not just the Conservatives, but also Labour as well, in making Labour appear weak, having agreed to various demands of the government. And so he's got this job now, and he also made the point about independence, Scotland's independence. But he's got the job now of leading the SNP in Westminster, deputised by Mhairi Black.
On we go then. So I will pin it down. How many weeks has he done now? About 5?
Yeah, I think it's five or 6.
It's just reminding me, I can't quite...
There was 1 week away.
Yeah, I know, but what is it that he is reminding me of? He's a bit like a head boy. He is a head boy. He was a head boy. I got no beef with that. One of my best friends was head boy. It's I don't know what it is, but
there's a criticism that he appears too much like a project manager.
Yeah,
but
he's not managing any projects. This is the problem. This is what I can't pin down, Theo.
But there's a difference, isn't there, between being a project manager, managing a project, trying to get something done, and being a leader. The Conservative Party at the moment is fractured. It's easier to deal with fractures in political parties when they're in opposition than when they're in government. And the point is that Rishi Sunak, rather than trying to side with one particular wing of the party or another, at every turn is trying to find a compromise to keep everybody happy, to keep the show on the road. That's why he has these consultations.
Yeah, it's an absolute mess, isn't it?
And he's got to try and keep the show on the road, and he's not making the same mistake that Liz Truss made, which was to suddenly think that just because he's become Prime Minister, the 80-seat majority, well, it's a bit less now, from the 2019 general election, is his majority, and that he can govern because he has won the public vote. There's been a fairly realistic analysis within his team that actually he doesn't have the political capital that Liz Truss mistakenly believed that she had, and he needs to keep everybody happy.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. Thank you, Theo. There's loads of stuff on the horizon because you've got the Boris Johnson inquiry coming up pretty soon.
Privileges Committee
coming up in the new year as well, and the COVID inquiry. All to look forward to, if that's the right phrase. Thank you, Theo. Just to clarify one thing for the benefit of Gary, who's in Darlington, Lord Bethel is not Barry Bethel, who used to advertise Slim Fast, mate. That's a different Bethel entirely, I think. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. It's 12:35. I should have told you sooner. Ian Hislop is going to be here in about 10 minutes. The editor of Private Eye, star of Have I Got News For You, playwright, all-round Renaissance man, to talk about the Private Eye Annual, which contains one of the proudest moments of my entire life, never mind career, but whether or not I tell you about that in front of him, we'll have to wait and see. But do stick around for that. Ian Hislop with us in about 10 minutes. Before that, I did put out an all-points bulletin earlier regarding the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay's admission that there may be some shortages of penicillin for GPs, but he was adamant that people need not worry unduly, local surges in demands and what have you. So I just wondered if any pharmacists could help. And Harish actually texted, and we broke the habit of a lifetime and rang him back, just because I couldn't be sure, Harish, that you were actually a pharmacist. But we've done due diligence and we've established that you are actually a pharmacist, and also that you're incredibly busy. So I won't keep you unduly, but what's going on with the antibiotics?
Firstly, I'm impressed that you checked me out.
Yes, well, we have.
Secondly, what it is that this morning I tried to order some antibiotics, and all the wholesalers in my region, they're all out of stock.
Gosh.
And we do not anticipate any. So I rang up a smaller wholesaler, and he said that he has been restricted to 10 bottles of antibiotics a day. This is for how many customers he has.
So he can't give more than 10 to any one customer?
No, he cannot get 10 from the supplier to give it to the pharmacist.
You sound, I mean, you, this is serious, clearly.
Yes. This is, I don't know where Mr. Barclay got his information. Maybe he's right, maybe I honestly don't know.
Well, maybe he is, maybe what you describe, he would file under local surges in demand and stocks are being moved around to meet the pressures, but they can't tell you when they're going to have the stocks to meet the pressures.
Precisely. So now we are struggling to obtain this, especially one brand of penicillin, the penicillin solution. Nobody seems to have it. They cannot tell us as to when we are going to get it. And I have got 3 prescriptions waiting, and I cannot fulfill it at the moment.
And so obviously we don't know how soon people are going to run out of their last prescription, but
this is it. No, this prescription, it is not even last. This is the first time they're getting it. So maybe...
of course, it's antibiotics, isn't it? So it's very infection specific.
That's right, you see. So we don't, I'm just going to ring up the GP and suggest, to crush a tablet, but that is highly, how can I say, it is not something that we would wish to do,
But there's not, you're coming up with ways of papering over the cracks. How pertinent, how significant is what you're describing to the Strep A story?
This is specifically for that.
Right.
Yikes. And because of that, some associated antibiotics have also been out of stock.
Right. Do we know why? Do we know why?
First of all, historically, there has been a shortage of medicine.
Right.
And this Strep A, has just compounded the effect.
I see. So there's been a run on it because of the Strep A, and the system can't cope, and the supply chain can't deliver as things stand.
You got it.
Gosh.
Yes.
What does the light at the end of the tunnel look like? If your suppliers are telling you they don't know when they're going to have it, I understand the urgency in your voice, Harish.
Yeah, but this is it. That we keep on asking them, and they say that there is no availability date.
Well, I might check in with you if that's all right. I don't want to distract you from your work too much, but we might check in with you tomorrow. Is that okay?
By all means, sir, by all means. No, unfortunately, I'm not working tomorrow, but my colleagues will be here.
Well, can you leave a post-it note and say that one of James O'Brien's crack team of operatives will just be checking in on what the score is, and we may cast our net a little wider. Your pharmacy, I think, is in St John's Wood, so,
Correct,
smack in the middle of London, as it were. Thank you,
right.
Harish. I shall let you get back to your very, very important work. Thank you for your front-line report, actually, and a slightly different picture, it would appear, from the one painted by the Health Secretary this morning, although, as Harish himself suggested, perhaps his inability to get hold of antibiotics is in part, or part of, the local surges that Steve Barclay was talking about. We will have to wait and see. Now, a remarkable story that I touched on earlier in the programme, unfolding in Germany, where there seems to have been a foiled coup attempt by the far right designed to install I think we could loosely describe as an eccentric or a sinisterly eccentric aristocrat at the top of the German government. Alexander Clarkson is a lecturer in German and European studies, working particularly on migration and EU security at King's College London. Did you coat your breakfast table in spluttered cornflakes this morning, Alexander, or were you less shocked perhaps than the rest of us?
Not particularly surprised. This has been building for a very long time. This is a movement who has its specific roots in this ideology in the 1980s. The idea that the German constitution is not legitimate because it was formulated in 1949 when there were hundreds of thousands of British, French, American, and East Germany Soviet troops in German soil, that its 1990 version isn't legitimate either. These are people who don't recognize German laws. They make up their own driver's license. They have support networks in the army and the police who've stolen weapons. In the 2010s, there were scandals in 2018, 2019, 2021. These aren't a lot of people, but it's a well-known fringe, and it's been known to be a potential danger.
And the minor aristocrat described as Prince Heinrich XIII, alleged to have been central to their plans. What do we know about him?
He's a relatively obscure character in the minor aristocracy. I mean, to give the German aristocracy a bit of credit, the really senior families, the Hohenzollern, the Welfen, those are the relatives of the British royal family, the Habsburgs, understand it's a democracy and have actually played a really constructive role. Some of them are even leftish ideologically. So they had to actually find a relatively minor figure on the far right already. It's not the aristocrats, not even the leadership that's the danger. It's the figures in the police and the army that sympathize with this that is what would have caused this huge use of 3,000 police officers, 25 and a growing number of arrests.
And is far right a fair description?
It's really anchored in far right thought. I mean, these are ideas that again, it's not a majority of the population, but these are ideas that are fringe but are present enough in everyday life that I think a lot of people will have just encountered them. Like I had, just anecdotally, I grew up in Hanover in Germany. I had people at high school, friends who unfortunately ended up becoming neo-Nazi skinheads. They would spout this kind of nonsense in class. That would be awkward discussion. So it's very present. People know about it, encounter it, and know that it's present enough to be a real problem for the state.
Is it, misunderstanding you perhaps, is it a sort of offshoot of the Great Betrayal narrative? Is it a sense that Germany's problems have been caused by foreign interference, even in its own affairs?
But I mean, in a sense, it has a kernel of truth to it, the extent to which that, of course, when Germany lost the Second World War in 1945, it had to reorganize society in West Germany and then reorganize society under Soviet control in East Germany under the occupation of hundreds of thousands of troops from Britain, France, and the United States. For good reason. Yes. The Germans had lost. It was a National Socialist regime, and there was a Cold War dynamic that meant that also that part of Europe needed defense from Soviet pressure. But they take that to mean that what was a constitution that is revered by most of German society, like the constitution in Germany is a bit like the monarchy in Britain. It's the center of all political debate and identity. When I went to school, I was handed a copy of the Constitution on my first day at high school. That was a sign of, in a way, of me becoming an adult.
Right.
So that's why they're particularly provocative. It's very provocative for them to attack the Constitution because it's the foundation of all political and in some ways economic life in Germany. And because they see it as a center of that, as a far-right movement, their aim is to undermine the stability of the state and society by attacking its very heart, which is the basic law, whose first sentence is the rights of all humans are inviolable. And to attack that would be to undermine German society.
Finally, there is some seepage into what you might describe as more mainstream politics, I think. One of the people arrested and suspected of being part of the plot was a member of the far-right AfD in the Bundestag.
Yes, I mean, the AfD is a lot of people involved in the AfD, and there's a battle within the AfD between those who are very much neo-Nazi far-right, like figures like Björn Höcke, who basically implicitly deny the legitimacy of the Constitution, and those who are national conservative but still want to operate within the confines of the Constitution. So this battle within the far right between those who just about want to stay in democracy and those who want to tear it down is crucial. And it looks like figures like Höcke are winning that battle in the AfD.
I see.
So these guys are on the very fringe fringe violent elements of that. But this idea that the Constitution is illegitimate, that's something that's prevalent in a party that is, gets up to 10 to 15% of the vote.
And this presumably is going to be a successful exercise in containment. I mean, looking at the numbers involved and looking at the scale of the police operation, there must have been genuine concern that they had meaningful ambition, but they've cut it off at the neck, I think.
I'm not sure. I mean, I've been talking to colleagues about this, and the concern is that they may have nailed the leadership, but the really dangerous guys are this tiny fringe group of policemen and soldiers, officers.
Yes.
And they're the ones who will have had access to these weapons that have been stolen. Until they're nailed, the threat hasn't been handled.
And crossover with some QAnon types as well, I read.
Yeah, also there's a lot of crossover with what are called the Querdenker, Querdenker, led by figures like Ken Jebsen. And there's been a lot of growing contact between them. And if they can build that kind of basis, then it becomes a movement that, again, it's fringe, but it would involve thousands of people and would be big enough to cause a lot of trouble, particularly in provinces, Bundesländer like Saxony.
Good grief. Alexander, thank you so much. Alexander Clarkson is a lecturer for German and European Studies at King's College London, and a particularly good follow on Twitter, actually, where he tweets us at APH Clarkson. What a remarkable story. And I mean, similarly remarkable, and speaking of people who spring from a similar political well, Donald Trump was in terrible trouble yesterday with regard to the tax affairs of his organisation. That's something we'll probably have time to have a look at tomorrow, but not today, because up next is Ian Hislop, editor of Private Eye, star of screen and not star of stage, but writer of, oh, never mind, you know who he is. It's 10 to 1 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are delighted to welcome into the studio the ghost of Christmas Present. It's
Thank you.
Ian Hislop, the editor of Private Eye, star, of course, of Have I Got News for You, and editor of The Annual, which has just come out, which will be it would be in my stocking if I hadn't kindly been supplied with an edition by your people. I'll ask you a question everyone must ask you at the moment. And I'll refer you to Gordon Brown's comment yesterday or the day before that the current government is the most corrupt we've seen in over 100 years. For people foolish enough not to read Private Eye, I should stress that you work without fear or favour, and there's bound to be a little more coverage of whoever is in power than whoever is in opposition. But you are politically scrupulously impartial.
Yes.
Would you agree with Gordon Brown? And how on earth do you take the mickey or know where to start when there is so much in the zone that is worthy of your attentions?
Well, I mean, you deal with what's in front of you. Your first question, I mean, politicians who are out of office do tend to think that the people who are in office are so much worse than they ever were. I mean, there were quite a lot of corruption scandals during New Labour. And you
passports,
don't have to,
I remember.
Passports, the Hindujas. Do you remember Mr. Mandelson having to leave office a number of times before he was given a peerage? Tory peers, fairly disgraceful, but come on. We've had some Labour ones. Many of them had to leave office. So I think you don't want to over-egg it. A historical view, certainly Private Eye has been, going since the 60s. And if you look at some of the early scandals there, you'd think, is this the most corrupt ever? I think what we've got at the moment is a mixture of the most useless. I mean, I think we've really hit the bottom of the barrel after 12 years of Tory government. And the most shameless. They don't seem to care. I mean, the PPE scandal, which the Eye has spent...
You were way ahead of the curve on that. Well, you often are. If there's a recurring joke in Private Eye, which predates you, where you point out, I as Passim, the fact that these are stories that... I mean, I've got to confess, there were times when I was on Fleet Street and I might have run a story thinking I'd got an exclusive only to find out that it had been in Private Eye about 18 months ago. With the PPE contracts, you did a special report.
Yes, and our journalist Richard Brutz, he was
we had Richard in the studio, actually.
Oh, yeah, well, MedPro very early.
Yes.
I mean, there is something sort of, because... stories require traction, and suddenly you sort of blonde lingerie baroness, it's more interesting for the press than everything else. But you do start thinking, oh, God, what was it about Baroness Moan that attracted David Cameron originally? And every time you think, how could these people have been fooled?
How do you retain any faith at all in human nature?
Well, because people care enough to dig these things up and tell you about them. So, you know our secret of journalism. It's people get on the phone and say, did you know? And we say, no, we didn't know, but we think other people should. And then we put it in. So that alone, I think, is enough to keep you going.
And can you plot a graph of how often your phone rings, or is it a fairly constant refrain, or are there times where, my goodness me, we don't leave the office in case another scoop is being called in?
Yes, no, I think when people get angry, then the floodgates open.
It's a bit like my job.
It is. I mean, and I think because at the moment, because we've had such an extraordinary year, people are just a bit exhausted.
Yes.
And they're not quite sure they can bear another set of dramatic events in politics. I mean, we ended up some issues with 2 different prime ministers, and that is new. We haven't done that before.
No, and the cover, which is generally the best. But I mean, you have several contenders, don't you, for the cover?
We do,
but it's
yes.
a speech bubble-based joke.
Yes.
That is very, very rarely overtaken by events, but possibly more this year than any other.
Yeah, no, we totally missed out on.
There was one day where it came out about an hour.
Yeah. But we tend to guess early. So when Liz Truss became Prime Minister, we ran a cover saying she's the perfect continuity candidate for Boris because she's blonde, self-publicist, does U-turns, and she'll be out within minutes. And she was.
Lo and behold, off she went. How do you decide what makes the cut for the annual? And does it run chronologically, or is it a potpourri of pleasures?
It's chronological, just because the events this year were so fast that by the time we got to trying to choose it, half of it seemed like ancient history. I mean, we started the year worrying about Partygate. Yeah. I mean, that feels like black and white now. It was, the events are so fast. And then Private Eye had a bit of a problem in the middle of the year because I put a picture of an overflowing toilet on the cover and said this was Boris Johnson's legacy as Prime Minister. And some of our readers thought that was childish and pathetic. I thought it was Swiftian. It was also quite childish and pathetic. So we've had a number of problems this year, but choosing that sort of joke, I'm afraid that's my fault.
Yeah, well, I mean, and also your achievement. I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm just working on the presumption that there are some people unlucky enough not to have welcomed Private Eye into their life many, many years ago. But your letters page uniquely will contain all of these criticisms and all of these complaints.
It will, and with any cover, that someone is going to object. So when we had Boris with a speech bubble saying, bring your own booze, we just had hundreds of voices shouting, boo! And then we found, hello, this joke appeared in Keir Starmer's Prime Minister's Question Time.
It did.
And we thought, good grief, the Labour Party not only borrowed a lot of old policies, it's taken our joke.
It's a serious form of flattery, I think. I've possibly had similar experiences with Keir Starmer. I need to thank you as well, Ian, for one of the proudest moments of my life. You probably won't remember this. I think it would be in January or February when you ran a headline, Culture Secretary to crack down on social media abuse, which ended with the paragraph, when police arrived at her doorstep, she denied being an abusive troll and said she had never called anyone a public school posh boy, and then a word I can't say on the radio, as that would have been ungrateful to the person who had made her culture secretary. And that appeared under a headline, by lunchtime O'Brien.
Yep.
Which was a moment of pure pleasure. I'm not sure I've ever missed my late father, who introduced me to Private Eye and was also a journalist called O'Brien who enjoyed a good lunch, more than I did when I saw that in black and white.
Well, that's terrific. And inside a Nadine Dorries joke. I mean,
just
honestly.
Incredible, isn't it? Absolutely remarkable. You never don't have fun putting the paper, the magazine together. That's obvious. But every edition seems to have that balance of news, largely because the pages are sort of set in stone, aren't they? You have the sections that you might introduce a new one. So your medical correspondent has been afforded extra pages since the coronavirus started.
Yes, and old Sparky, who's inside the energy industry, has
Mark
suddenly...
Spreader's going to be busy moving forward because the food and the agriculture situation is about to blow up.
The specialists get more or less room, but I was trying to explain to an American academic, the guiding principle of Private Eye, and I said it was very P.L. Travers. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, I'm afraid it's Mary Poppins. It's a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. And that's why I think people read the Eye, because you have to try and make it bearable.
People who don't know it and who know you from Have I Got News for You would be surprised by the depth and the quality of the investigative journalism, which is, as you know, I mean, you think of the late, great Paul Foote. I mean, it is absolutely, for people who do know it, it's as important as the humour, but
it is, and it's a strange mix of jokes and journalism. But it does mean that if you're very depressed about the war, there is a joke for you. You know, there's Putin saying to one of his generals, "We're a peacekeeping force," and the general saying, "Which peace do we want to keep?" And then Putin says, "All of it." And in a sense, you have to go with the grim as well. And people often say, "God, it's very black." The humour in Private Eye, and you go, "Well, yeah." I mean, my favourite recent joke was a picture of Matt Hancock with a toad on his head, and Hancock saying, "Who croaked?" And the toad said, "Everyone's granny."
Oh, God. It's
dark enough?
Yes, it is dark enough.
Thank you.
My favourite, probably, it makes the cover as well of the annual, is Rees-Mogg urges civil servants to stop working from home, and there's a picture of him reclined on the front bench, like it's sort of attending a Roman orgy or something like that, reclining on the front bench in the House of Commons with the speech bubble saying, "Get back to work, you lazy sods."
It is the nerve of it. I mean, I read today, so there's a backbench rebellion amongst the Tories, and two prominent backbenchers, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. You'd think they'd have the decency to just shut up for a bit or go on holiday again. No, there they are, putting the knife in.
In Johnson's case, the polar opposite of what he stood for when he was actually Prime Minister. So there is more than enough reasons to make sure that Private Eye Annual 2022 is in your stocking this Christmas. A final question, actually, to tell people about the sales, about the circulation.
Well, the sales, these are tough, these questions. It's actually pretty good at the moment. We're selling about 240,000. I'm sorry if it's late because of rail strikes or post strikes or joke strikes. I'm not sure who's on strike at the moment. But it should get to you, and certainly the magazine is still selling, so
it's not just crossed. Selling. That's why I mention it. Is that it's a market leading. Organ.
I think there is still, whatever anyone said, there is still a market for being told things you don't know and for reading jokes about things you do know.
Isn't that just? Thank you, Ian. Always a pleasure. And Private Eye Annual 2022 is out now. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player or on James O'Brien, the Whole Show podcast. Global Player is where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as the world's biggest podcast. Shall I put my teeth in and do that again?
LBC.
Over all of LBC. It's lunchtime O'Brien. That's what it is.
Christmas breakfast, was it? Yeah.
There's also you can also find the episode of Full Disclosure where I interviewed Ian Hislop in that in that archive as well. One of us can remember it. Download Global Player for free from the App Store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Don't you think it's funny how some broadcasters can broadcast but not read out loud?
It's funny that.
Yeah, thanks.
No, I think that's true of the best of them, may I just say.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I could do auto cue, but it's a bit weird in here.
Yeah. See, I did news reading for years, so I've got the pace, the discipline.
Steve Allen can do news reading.
The pace, the discipline.
I've got absolutely no problems at all.
Okay. I also remembered, after having a quick chat with the outside in, that I was listed in Coleman Balls years ago.
Was it unfair?
I can't remember what I said.
Really?
But I was
Thank goodness for that.
I was so pleased. I was just like, I'm in Coleman Balls. I was made my entire life, I think. Thank you very much.
No, there's very good Coleman Balls. A World Cup commentator commentating on one of the matches recently saying, "And the Saudis, they'll cut your hand off." I think he meant bite.
He meant bite. Thank you very much to both of you. 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 Thank you very much to